Good morning. It's already 11 o'clock. Even the way may trick you to think it's 8 o'clock in the morning or, I know, late afternoon. But this is the questionable charm of November at our climate. I know weather talks can be as long as you wish, especially that we have British citizens in the room. But we have also other interesting topics planned for today. So our meeting needs to start now. My name is Justyna Motrenko. I've been employed at the Foundation for Polish Science for the past 15 years. And for the half of them, I've been working in the international corporations. Also a privilege to work on the project run jointly by the Research Council of Norway and the Foundation for Science, funded by EEA and Norway grants, as a bilateral initiative titled Barriers of Research Valorization in Poland, Lessons Learned from EEA and Norway grants, and Recommendations, which brought us all here today. But you must know I'm just doing an admin work in it. The masterminds of these projects are the members of our expert team, which are also here with us today. And please let me introduce them in alphabetical order. Dr. Lisa Cowie from the UK, once a physicist, always a physicist. Yes, that's what I thought. Later now, an international expert on intellectual property rights and grant scheme design and evaluation, passionately working in the newer EU member states, Western Balkans, and Eastern Partnership countries. Dr. Hugh Allen Edwards, also from the UK. Yeah, hi, Hugh. A technology transfer and commercialization professional who has developed and delivered programs to create viable research commercializations ecosystem. Professor Une Fischer from Norway. Yes, sorry. Professor of Innovation Studies and Prorector for Innovation and Society at the University of Stavanger and also Director of the Center for Innovation Research. Professor Laurits Holm Nielsen from Denmark. International experience and recognized leader in higher education, research and innovation, holding critical roles in Denmark's reform effort since 1986. Between 2005 and 2013, rector of Aarhus University, also the World Bank's Global Lead Specialist for Higher Education, and in Poland, most known for being chair of Excellence Program EDUB for Polish universities. Professor Karl Klingsheim from Norway has served as executive officer and board member for multinational companies, as well as for university spin-offs in Norway and the USA. He was CEO of Antenio Technology Transfer from its very beginning in 2003 to full operation in 2016. And you must believe me, he's a legend there. Dr. Randi Elisabeth Takst, also from Norway. Sorry. Holds a PhD in Innovation Studies and currently works as a senior advisor at Westlandens Innovationsselskap, short WIS, for Polish people and other non-native Norway speakers. Dr. Takst has over 30 years of cross-sector experience in project management and leadership at national and international levels. And also in the team is Katarina Howra from Sweden, unfortunately not here with us today. Expert on sustainable business models, circular economy, system development and innovation processes. Coached more than 500 startups, mostly at Uppsala Innovation Center and at KTH Innovation. All of our experts have impressive bios. It would take me half an hour to do them justice, so I haven't even tried. You can find them at the end of our report. Dear honorable guests, I would like to welcome you very warmly and thank you for joining us on site here at the FNP office and online. This event from the very beginning was planned as a round-table discussion. And although this very piece of furniture, meaning the round table, is missing in the room, you can use your imagination and imagine that it's here because we would like you to remember that you are invited here to take part in a discussion, to challenge the findings and recommendations, including the report, which you need to know is still not finished. And we'll undergo final touch-ups when we gather your feedback from today. It's worth noting that you represent different groups of stakeholders, researchers, research managers, and also policymakers, and even different national systems. Thank you for coming. Please feel at home, and we are very much looking forward to hearing your opinions and to these discussions later on. But let us firstly officially open the meeting with the word of welcome from Professor Maciej Żywicz, President of the Foundation for Science, directly followed by the speech of Benedicte Lizet, RCN's Executive Director, responsible for research system and internationalization. Professor Żywicz.
So thank you, Justyna, for this very kind introduction of why we are gathered here. And on the behalf of the Foundation for Polish Science, I would like to welcome all of you here. And it is a great pleasure to host you. And it was a great pleasure also to participate in the discussions in different places, in Gdansk, in Krakow, in Wrocław. So this was very important for us. I remember when I came to the foundation, I was trying to convince and succeed my colleagues in the foundation that we should support science with consequences, and with consequences for the society. And this was actually a thing which I learned when I was a member of the Council of ENBO, that this is important for us, for all of us, I would say. And the Foundation for Polish Science is in between of two agencies, one NCN, which is devoted to the basic science, and one NCBR, which is devoted to the applied science. So I think it's important that we are in the between, and we need to make a bridges between these two agencies also. We are a small unit. We have like 3% of the money of the THANK program devoted to Poland, so it's this tiny amount, but still we would like to choose our deals very carefully, like we were doing this for years. And I'm really glad that we can now discuss this document which Lisa prepared, and after the discussion with the experts, and I'm looking forward for this discussion. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted to welcome everyone on behalf of the Research Council of Norway, particularly our host today, the Foundation for Polish Science. I want to begin by acknowledging Professor Sulic and the team at FMP who put significant effort into organizing this event. Research valorization is a relatively new term in Norway, where we still often use the terms like social impact or effects of research for society. But the challenge and its importance are not new. Creating the right conditions for a fruitful dialogue between science and society are more important than ever. There is a need for turning research results more efficient into sustainable products and solutions, whether it is economic, social progress, or improved policymaking. I am sorry not to be able to join you in person today, but I'm looking forward to the report, and I hope to meet you in Oslo for the final stage of our joint project. Thank you all for joining us in this dialogue, which I hope will provide significant input and foundation of the future, including the future for EEA and Norway grants in Poland. I look forward to the fruitful discussions ahead. Thank you.
Thank you for these words of welcome. And as we all deal with science and research in one way or another, we praise the facts and see no alternatives to them when talking about the truth. But we also know that facts love a good narrative. Hence now, my colleagues from FNP and RCN are going to share with you the reasons behind the project, its goals, and most importantly, tell you why we like to discuss research valorization so much. Please welcome Michał Pietras and then Dorota Juszczyk, from the FNP, followed by Tor Aikas from RCN.
Good morning. I'm really privileged to start with this short introduction of the project, because what we do today, you will see results of a project done together by Foundation for Polish Science and Research Council of Norway. I will try to follow my presentation. Both of our organizations, Research Council of Norway and Foundation for Polish Science, we are members of Science Europe. You see that? And EEA grants and Norway grants in Poland have been widely recognized in Poland and used since 2006 already. By the way, Foundation was one of the first beneficiaries at that time in 2006 of this EEA grants with our homing program. European structural funds are implemented by Foundation for Polish Science. So both our organizations, we feel responsible. We hold a significant responsibility to society for the results of our funding, for the results of our projects. So on one hand, we have to maximize the impact of the funding and communicate to society what the impact was about. And we have to report on the outcomes and on the long-term effects. When science is properly communicated and implemented, the public may be better recognizing the role of science and appreciated the scientific effort, and perhaps more inclined in supporting science also. So we came together with an idea with Research Council of Norway to create a project which will examine exactly what happens with our results. Our results of our funding are assets. So we have to know how the assets are managed. And a new term of research valorization, also relatively new in Poland, is our joint concern with Research Council of Norway, because we have to think about the process of turning scientific research into application. We are open and we care for all disciplines, because all disciplines create results and all the results can be implemented either through economic activity or through social activity or policy making, improving the way we live. However, research valorization is also a significant gap between research and application. And that's why the project is called Gap Analysis, because we analyze precisely this gap, research and practical application. We bridge this gap. Obviously, when we usually talk to you as the beneficiaries of the funds of the foundation or the EEA grants, we came across the first approach to the research valorization. First approach is usually commercialization, meaning tech transfer, because it's economic value, economic impact. However, beyond commercialization is a real vital and huge area of influencing society and improving life of society. And that is particularly important for all our disciplines. Communicating research funding is also a real key factor of the research valorization. Communicating to the partners and increasing collaboration. Collaboration is a key factor which we have to analyze. We have to discuss the collaboration between academia and stakeholders outside academia. Valorization basically is about cooperation of academia with non-academic part of society. Obviously, we go through entrepreneurship because we are vitally interested in true entrepreneurship done by scientists and based on the results of their research. So, bilateral project with Research Council of Norway was meant to learn from the experience. So that's why a huge part of the project is devoted to discussion and to interaction, and to going to hearing your experience of beneficiaries, of talking to stakeholders, to rectors, directors, and basically what is most valuable, it's based on experts' view, with experts we've already known and we will see many times today in this panel discussion. Gap analysis is the focal point and starting point for all our further discussion. Thank you. Dorota will tell us how we will technically organize the project.
Okay.
I've just discovered I have a hole in my lovely green dress, but I hope you can't see. How do I? This one? Oh, yeah. So my name is Dorota Juszczyk. I work here at the foundation. I usually get the name of my position wrong, so I will read. So I'm a program evaluation and analysis coordinator. So that's right. So I'm the person behind all these emails. So apologies if I send you too many emails, but I wanted to make it work. So I will start where Michał ended, with the knowledge valorization. So the very broad definition is the process of creating value from knowledge and turning research results into sustainable solutions with economic value and societal benefits. But when we look at this graph, it might be difficult to see how we can go from research results to, for example, impact, prosperity, jobs, or health. And I thought a good example would be smoking and smoking cessation. Can you imagine that in 1950, around 80% of men and 40% of women were smokers? So if we were having this conference back in 1950 or 1960, I suppose most of you would be sitting here puffing away on a cigarette. Now it's actually around 20% of adults smoking. And for example, for me, an interesting fact, in New Zealand, they think that by 2025, so in over a year, less than 5% of adults will be smokers. And I think that's a good example of how we can translate evidence from research, because the first findings regarding the effects of smoking were published in the British Medical Journal in 1950, and then translating this research into knowledge help us, for example, to find out that imposing a higher tax on smoking is the best and one of the most successful ways of reducing smoking, also with other measures. So in this project, we wanted to find out how beneficiaries of EEA and Norway grants are doing in terms of knowledge valorization. So now I have a puzzle for you. This is an AI-generated image, and it's showing the same concept. Can you guess what these people are doing? Justina. Looking for something.
Analysis.
Yes, they are analyzing the gap. So I thought this is a good way to emphasize that we are analyzing a gap. We are not doing a very methodological study. We wanted to start this discussion, initiate this discussion about knowledge valorization and do this gap analysis. By the way, which one is your favorite picture of the gap analysis? So Justina already introduced our expert team. I wanted to use AI again to produce a picture of collaboration between technology, Denmark, Norway, UK, Sweden. And I asked AI to do a picture showing that they are flying together, and it took it by the word. So we've got the flying together word on the on this picture. Another puzzle for you. So now I'm going to talk about how we did the project. So we organized 4 meetings in 4 beautiful Polish cities. So can you guess by the old towns which cities we visited. So the first one is easy. On the left, it's the one we are now. It's Warsaw. The second one is Gdańsk. The third one, Wrocław and Kraków. I don't know how much you know about the Norwegian grants. So the EEA Norway grants 2014-2017, two Polish institutions, the National Science Center and the National Center for Research and Development, were responsible for distributing the funds. So NCN was a budget of 44 million, and this was to fund basic science, so Greek, Idea Lab and POLS, and the applied research program, which was worth 66 million, Polnor CCS, which is carbon capture and storage, and Idea Lab. So we organized 4 meetings in those 4 Polish cities. We invited 26 teams of beneficiaries, because I think that's quite important, that we aimed not only to invite the PIs of the projects, but also people involved in the admin or technology transfer. So we planned 26 meetings. We managed to meet 22 teams and had 22-hour-long meetings. So I think for a beginning of a discussion, to conduct 22 hours of discussions, I think it's a pretty good start. And we invited beneficiaries of Polnor, many Polnor projects, Greek, and some projects from FNP, the MAP and FIRST team. And there are some names of the institutions we visited, like University of Gdańsk, Krakow University of Technology, Jagiellonian University in Krakow, and so on. And what happens next is for Lisa to discuss in a few moments, but now I would like to invite Tor-Ivar to do his presentation. Thank you.
Good. So thank you. I'm Tor-Ivar Eikås from Research Council of Norway. And you may wonder why the Research Council of Norway is involved in the discussion on barriers for knowledge valorization in Poland. But for us, the story is twofold. First, the Research Council has been involved in the EEA Norway grants programs for research cooperation since 2006, almost 20 years. So we have a lot of experience. And second, as was mentioned by my colleague earlier, we have regular meeting with our FNP colleagues in Science Europe, an organization for research funders, and where importance and the impact of research on our society is deeply often discussed. And following one of these meetings, an idea matured. Why not take a deeper look at EEA Norway grants, and where we have more than 180 bilateral research projects involving Polish and Norwegian researchers and partners, and have been carried out over the last 2 decades. And we have a lot of evaluation and data results telling us what has been achieved in these projects. But we need to better understand how to unleash the full potential of the knowledge, data, and networks that have been established during these projects. The aim was to create a bilateral platform to analyze and have a dialogue, to leverage the experiences of Polish and Norwegian partners, and to deliver insight and recommendations based on the gap analysis that was mentioned, notably with respect to transfer of knowledge from academic sector to the economy and to create societal impacts. And also recognizing the widening scope of knowledge valorization and the benefit to the society. It's much more than economic exploitation. And lastly, and that is important, putting the findings into the context and objectives of the EEA and Norway grants. From our point of view, increased focus on knowledge valorization is essential. First, to be able to find solutions on the challenges and opportunities we are now facing, and in particular for the twin green and digital transition. But also in more general security, resilience, societal issues relevant for the whole Europe. What we do see is that there is a need for transforming more efficiently knowledge into valuable societal and economic benefits. And looking at the EA Norway grants, I think it makes sense to also reflect on the development on the EU arena. For the EU programs for research and innovation, we have seen quite some development on what has and is expected from collaboration projects being funded with respect to project outcomes, exploitation, and impacts. Back in FP5, I'm getting old, FP5 that was running from 1998 to 2002, it was more or less sufficient for the applicants to indicate what would be the project results. Dissemination was in a key element. But in reality, with no requirements to substantiate how and the pathway towards success. And the credibility of the plans were to a large degree not reflected in the scoring of proposal at all. From FP5, there has been a continuous development. And now, in Horizon Europe, it's a completely new and different ballgame. Credibility of the plans, involvement of stakeholders, timing, impact on society, etc. has become essential and key to success. Technology readiness levels, manufacturing readiness levels have been introduced and implemented. And more recently, societal readiness level has also been introduced and seems to become more and more important. This means elements key to valorization, as discussed in today's event, has become more and more important for us. In this context, this report is very timely and relevant for two reasons. One, the findings and recommendation will serve both as inspiration and important insight when the programs for the next period of EA and Norway grants are shaped, and what could be done from the EA and Norway grant side to valorize on results already achieved. And second, we do believe that EA and Norway grants is an important stepping stone towards other funding sourcing, being grants, equity, loans, for example in Horizon Europe, including the EU missions, and the future framework program FP10. Where valorization obviously will become important. So it's with great interest we will listen to today's panels and roundtable discussions and getting insight that will be important for the shaping of the programs for the next period of EA and Norway grants. Thank you.
Thank you, Michał, Dorota, and Tor Ivar. Now we know a lot more about our motivations and about the project. But it's not much worth if it's not, the project, if it's not bringing some useful and applicable results. Dr. Lisa Cowie is going to take stage for the next couple of sessions and do the hard work of speaker and moderator of the discussions on the experts' findings and recommendations regarding research valorization in Poland. Welcome, Lisa.
Thank you, Steve.
And thank you to everybody for coming here today. I think I'm a bit shorter than you are.
They did.
Super. That's good. Thank you. Yeah, that's better. Thank you. It's always a pleasure to come to Poland. I find it a really energizing country. So it's been very good to be back. And as somebody who comes from the UK, I'm always really grateful when anybody from the EU invites me to continue to participate in things. So what I'm hoping to do in the next 15 minutes is just offer you a quick overview of the report as it stands at the moment. Because as I think has been made clear, we have reached a point of having a draft, but this is also the point where it is possible now for us to get feedback and possibly make some changes. So just to talk briefly about the aims and objectives of the report, this has been presented a little bit by other people, but it was very important for us as a team to understand what the aims and the objectives were. And I think the activity has been very timely because we are across Europe recognizing that there are new drivers for what we probably all used to call technology transfer. And we now have this emergence of knowledge valorization as a very central objective. And we're seeing that coming down from the top. We see that from the European Commission itself.
And we were being asked as a team to go out and explore what are the barriers to research valorization here in Poland, and in particular to take a look at this experience that has been accrued underneath the EEA grants, the Norway grants, as well as other grant schemes. So we did meet with people from NCBR grants, from the FNP grants, and also from others. So we got a quite diverse set of opinions over what were the barriers to valorization. It was really useful, obviously, that we had a diverse team. We get a lot of different experience from different countries through the team. We also have some good diverse opinions on what we've seen, which again is always really useful for an exercise like this. You don't get very robust results if everybody agrees from day one. It's always important to me that if somebody puts an idea on the table, everybody is prepared to pick it up and shake it really hard. And you say at the end of the shaking, is it still there? Has it been robust? Or actually, do we need to go away and rethink that? So we have a diversity of opinion, and we welcome that today. And we would hope to be able to make some concrete recommendations for action at different levels. So obviously to people who are launching and managing grant schemes, to people who manage universities, to researchers, possibly even going to a higher level to come up more to government level itself. But what do we mean by valorization? As a team, we came back to this several times. We were saying, well, what do we mean? When we're being asked barriers to valorization, what do we mean? Because I think this idea that science has consequences is probably absolutely core to the valorization. But when we've talked to different people, it's quite clear that different people have different interpretations of what is meant by valorization. From people that would say, well, it's just a new word for research commercialization. It's the new buzzword for research commercialization. To people who've talked a lot more about how you can get more impact for society, for different groups in different ways, which becomes more complex because often the underlying business model is harder for people to find. It's not about selling things to people any longer. It's finding a way of funding something sustainably. So we did keep coming back to this one as an issue. Briefly on the approach, just again from our perspective, we've seen we went to at least 4 different places. We had meetings with around 24 different individuals or groups, which is always a good way to get a diversity of opinion. But we would also accept as a team that actually that's not that many people, if you're looking at Poland. And you're always saying, is this opinion that we're hearing representative of the wider pool, or is this one individual who holds this? Can we find a way of triangulating and validating what we're hearing here? And again, what is important for us today is that we are presenting you with our preliminary findings and recommendations. This is an opportunity for you to come back and say, actually, I disagree. My own experience is different. Collectively, we believe our institution's opinion is different. So today forms a really important sounding board over refining the report as we go forward. Briefly over the structure of the report, I'm hoping everybody's been sent a copy of it, but I know that it went out on Friday and Monday was a holiday, so you may well not have had a chance to read it in any detail. We tried to split this up into different topics. So we looked at grant scheme design and funding landscapes, all the way through to the outside ecosystem. Partly this is because how the results started to emerge for us when we began to filter them and move them around. Also because on our expert team we have particular individuals where we would say, well, you've been working on ecosystem design for a long time. Is this somewhere that you can look at? Is this something that you can look at legal barriers? Can you look at legal aspects? So this is the structure that we as experts brought to the report. So let me go through the key findings and recommendations. And again, as I said, this is our perspective, which you may want to challenge. So we started by looking at grant scheme design and the funding landscape. One reason I think this is often a good place to start is that if you are an organisation that is running grant schemes, this is the bit that's under your control. So often I would say it's great to say, let's try and improve the roads, let's try and fill in the potholes, let's try and smooth the external environment. But if that requires other people to do things, what's really useful is if you optimise the vehicle that you are driving. Look to the suspension, look to tyre pressure, optimise your own vehicle first. But these were sort of our key findings in terms of current grant scheme design and the funding landscape. At the moment, we would say that the existing grants don't actually make valorisation a clear component in its own right. It's not emerging as a central aspect from these grants. And for researchers, there is a tendency to say, well, we will rewrite our proposals so it looks as if it's valorisation. Or So you're not necessarily deliberately creating value, you are making yourself eligible and more likely to be funded, which is not unusual. It happens in most countries. And that if you talk to researchers and in extent to the funding organisations, they are still interpreting valorisation as commercialisation. It's still very much about economic value as a result. And that once you have finished your initial grant in Poland, it's not clear exactly how you would graduate onto the next grant to take you forward. So the European Commission works very hard on building what they call the funding escalator. So as you graduate from one, if you've graduated strongly, you're able to move on to the next one and move on to the next one. We don't see that very strongly at the moment in Poland, but you may want to come back and challenge us over that one there. And for many groups that have finished with funding in Poland, they need to graduate to EU funding. An awareness of where they can go beyond Horizon Europe is still quite low. And I mean, Horizon Europe is a huge, broad palette. Where do you go within Horizon Europe? Where are the specialised grants? So we felt that that really was an area that could be improved. So our recommendations here. I mean, the first kind of obvious one, we would encourage all funding agencies to go back, review existing grant schemes, make changes and try and strengthen outcomes. And as somebody who works on grant schemes, I very often see grant schemes that are set up so that everything aligns beautifully, aims and objectives, evaluation criteria, monitoring and evaluation, final result. And then over the course of time, or sometimes just before a grant scheme is launched, people make slight changes. They say, oh, this would be a good idea, we'll do that. And what it actually does is pull you away from those overall aims and objectives. So it's always good to go back and review and see if you can strengthen the outcomes because that's under your control. And certainly there's a need, we feel, to emphasise this broad nature of impact when you're trying to talk about valorisation. So not just economic impact, but societal impact. And because people at the moment aren't really very aware of what societal impact really would be, what are the consequences of science, to be able to offer people many more examples of how they can do this and what's acceptable to your grant scheme, if you were going to do that. And obviously to raise awareness of follow-on sources that fit very closely to the existing grant schemes. And that might be something where NCPs would be going to play quite a strong role in that one. We also looked here, our second area, we looked at motivation of scientists and we looked at mission of universities, the sort of the third stream mission, the impact mission for universities. Not probably a terribly surprising finding, but actually most Polish scientists are not very motivated at the moment by valorisation of research. That could partly be that because for so long it's been about making money, and many good researchers are not motivated by making money. If they were, they wouldn't be researchers. They would be working somewhere that paid them more up front. And within the higher education system, we're still seeing the third stream mission is being quite narrowly interpreted, mainly as commercialisation for economic benefit, which is the easiest way of interpreting it and measuring it and monitoring it. And that while higher education institutes, universities are not blocking, on the whole, researchers from engaging in this, and not necessarily particularly supportive going forward at different levels. So in terms of recommendations here, we feel that there is a need to support researchers to engage much more strongly beyond economic gain, to think about why does my research bring benefits for society and how, and to support them to do that. And to broaden this scope of valorisation and make sure that it is reflected in the third stream indicator system. And I say that one a bit carefully because having spent about 2 hours last night having the KPI system explained to me by somebody here in Poland, I do know that you have one, and I do know that it is complicated. So this is something that we would like to come back to. Is it optimal at the moment? Could it be improved? And should that be quite a strong recommendation on our side? Or do you actually feel that it's probably as good as it's going to get for the time being under your new law on science? What about education, skills and competencies? And knowledge among the researchers that we talk to in Poland about commercialisation still is quite at a low level, which perhaps is a little bit surprising given that there has been quite a lot of support in the past. But then we also know researchers grow up. There has to be a constant support for young researchers coming into the system who will grow old and become postdocs so that we keep building that capacity in the young people. And again, most scientists are not suited to running companies. I would say that that's a universal finding. Personally, I don't actually think that good scientists ought to be encouraged to run companies. I think they should be encouraged to do good science. But I also know that other people disagree with me and they feel that good scientists ought to be helped to get the skills to be able to run a company as well. That's something that we can discuss. But there isn't a lot of support at the moment in Poland to help scientists develop skills, to develop what one of my colleagues here calls the entrepreneurial mindset, and I think she's going to talk a little bit more later about what she would mean by that, and what I would mean by business skills, so that you can be a good scientist and you can actually be a good business person as well. So we do feel again that if you were a grant scheme agency, you can actually run, and we're encouraging more of them to think about running courses for grant scheme beneficiaries, people that you have funded, rather than giving them the money and asking them to report, to actually say, we're alongside you, we will be running training, capacity building for the people that we have funded from all over Poland. And while we would see that probably it is difficult for individual universities to be running capacity building, it would be possible to have more schemes that run at national level. And I know they've been there for Poland in the past. I'm not seeing them myself at the moment any longer. And we would come back and say, a lot of people tell us they were really effective, they were really valued. How can the money be put into, once again, building that capacity at a national level for people who are really good, really dedicated, who do want to be entrepreneurial, who do want to open their own businesses, or who want to work more within industry. And perhaps to fund more collaborative projects. So rather than just saying we're on a training course, one of the other really great ways of doing this is saying you should actually be working inside a business for periods of time, and people from business should be working inside the university. So to make this knowledge transfer on two feet, two legs, as Carl tends to term it, because that is usually the best way of developing skills. It's actually working within the relevant environment rather than sitting in a training course for 8 hours. If we look at key findings for technology transfer, there is obviously a lack of critical mass within individual TTOs. So many TTOs in Poland, so many HEIs, so many TTOs, but it means that individual TTOs at times will struggle to have particular competencies and expertise needed by an individual project. And it is difficult to go outside and get that because there has to be a way of funding it. To say we'd like to find an expert in this area of science or this area of viable, sustainable business models, we'd like to hire somebody. So we would recommend very strongly to strengthen the support that that Centres for Technology Transfer and SPVs for the spin-outs can get if you, as a funding agency, have a project that has strong results. And to consider, again, new delivery models for TT support that bring skills together. We know this is enormously difficult. It's very hard to find a country where several universities have said, I tell you what, let's do this together. Certainly doesn't happen in my country. Individual universities have their own TTOs. I'm based back in Oxford. Oxford has never said, I think it's a great idea, we'll outsource our technology transfer to Cambridge. That would be, Cambridge can deal with it going forward. So we do know it's hard, but there are examples of countries now that are managing to have more of a centralised resource, particularly if it's sector-focused, which has happened in France. And I do know that it has been tried in Poland at regional level through the Marshal's office, and that this is still actively running in some areas. And again, we're encouraging people to come back and say, is there a new model that doesn't require one big university to outsource its technology transfer to another? Can we come up with modern ways of doing this? I know I'm out of time, so I'll try and keep this as brief without going over it into thin detail. We did take a look at legal and regulatory issues. This is a tough one because probably as a team, we don't get a huge amount of briefing on what the current legislation is. But what we would say at the moment is that we still feel that rectors and senior management are apprehensive about getting it wrong because there are repercussions, personal repercussions, if you get it wrong. And this is slowing technology transfer. It means that you get non-optimum outcomes, particularly if it's public procurement. People are struggling to get access to specialised facilities if they are start-up spin-out companies. And that may be somewhere where it would be possible to improve internal regulation or external legislation, provided that management itself is willing to then use it and to take that step. And that's something that I think some of the colleagues want to talk about more this afternoon about that. And in particular, there doesn't at the moment seem to be an easy way for people who do want to go and work in a new company to leave their job in Poland for a bit and then come back to it safely. And you might say, why should they be allowed to do this? Why shouldn't they just take the risk and go off and join a company? I regularly have people to say, if they were really committed, they'd join the spin-out. And I say, well, do you want to join the spin-out? No. So we expect scientists to take risks that actually very often other people aren't willing to take themselves. So perhaps what we do need to do is introduce more safety nets. So we come back to this recommendations that guidelines that reduce the risk for rectors to engage in commercial activity would be useful. And that can be things like approved valuing methods for IPR. Which method to value the IPR and sell it am I allowed to use and feel confident in that? To go back and rethink public procurement, it's really easy for a university to say, let's place one order per year. It's not necessarily optimum in terms of outcomes for lots of different research projects. And in terms of what is it permissible for an academic to do or not to do, could be clarified, it could be strengthened. You can take time away from your teaching duties to do this, but you can only go so far. That is something that we feel at the moment could be improved. And then just briefly, ecosystem development. I mean, ecosystems are absolutely critical for technology transfer, research, commercialization, and even more so now for valorization of knowledge. Some internal and external aspects. I think everybody accepts that if you're building an ecosystem, it needs to have a lot of people flowing in and out of it. It's clearly difficult for research teams here to attract the best international researchers to Poland. They're struggling to do that. And that when people are trying to valorize the results, there's a very strong focus on the domestic market, which is quite hard because it doesn't necessarily match domestic industry or the absorption capacity. to do that. And we're being told that the science business trust level remains low and it's difficult to enter into international markets. None of these come as a surprise. It's true for many, many countries, but some of them have made progress in overcoming this through ecosystem development. So we do think there should be more funding for Polish activities to attract PhD students and postdocs. A strong look at mobility schemes, and that perhaps does come back to the Norway grants where there is this option to have people flowing in and out of the system. And much more to work on developing local ecosystems around clusters. So you often got an area of Poland where they would say, well, pharmaceuticals quite strong here, where you could build the ecosystem, but to then make sure you embed that in an international network. It's got to connect beyond the region itself, and there are different ways to do that. I'm now slightly confused over where I am on my screen and your screen. Right, so those are our main findings. That's a quick overview of our preliminary recommendations. We would really invite people to come back today within the panel sessions or over coffee or by email afterwards to say, actually, we don't agree with this, or we think we would be recommending something else. And quite specifically, what we would like to do is to be able to show more examples of how this has been done elsewhere. And we're going to say, let's go beyond Poland. If you've seen a good example outside Poland, can you bring it to us? We have some, but I would welcome people contacting me over the next 2 weeks to say, actually, I saw a really good example of this in the Netherlands or Latvia, Lithuania, so that we can insert that into our report. And I would work with you strongly to do that over the next couple of weeks. So you can say a better way of doing this, a better way, for example, than looking at the French model of technology transfer office is to look at the, and bring me another example. Do we stop at this point and move on to our next panel? Because I know I've overrun. Thank you. Okay. All right. Right. And back to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lisa, for the great sum up of the findings of the project and the report. And now we are going to start our first panel discussion. Yes, it's so tempting to look here and there. Title: Grant Scheme Design, Funding and Motivation Impact. And again, please, Lisa, I'll come to the stage as a moderator of this panel discussion. I would also like to invite Professor Karl Klingsheim, Professor Urszula Stachewicz from AGH University, and Professor Natalia Marek-Członkowska from the IRAP SWIFT and previously and still International Center for Cancer Vaccine Science. Yeah, please come. Let's take the seats. Yes, you use your imagination. Thank you. That's exactly that.
So yeah, the things in 20th and there.
Is that? Yes. Okay, then my job at this point is to do two things. Firstly, to welcome you and to get out of you your insights, and secondly, to mispronounce everybody's name, which I apologise for in advance. We are running slightly late, but the good thing is I'm not going to talk for 3 minutes because I've already talked for about 15 minutes. So what I'm hoping that we can do in this is to ask each of our panellists to talk for around 3 minutes on what your main feelings are about grant scheme design. And you can be very specific if you've got comments on this one, and about third stream mission here in Poland. And then we will invite the audience for questions. So if I just look at this, Natalia, can I start with you? Yes, please.
Yes,
do you want to pronounce your name for the audience?
Thank you. My name is Natalia Marek-Członkowska. I have been leading International Center for Cancer Vaccine Science at the University of Gdańsk. This is the autonomic center of excellence established in 2017 with support of Foundation for Polish Science. And I'm very happy that this report has been created, and there are very good solutions in my opinion. Before I make some more specific comments, I also would like to defend somehow Poland, just to give you some information about our history. Yeah? We are at this point, and we have some issues with understanding what is science valorization. I think because of our history, because Poland disappeared from European map for more than 100 years. We became a country again after First World War, and then we also lost our freedom again. And for these years, we thought that we had very small impact on anything, and whatever we do probably does not matter. And I think this is somehow inside of us, and we need to change this mindset. We need to work with this. I think this is something that we have, the generation were raised, and now we need to convert this. And it's changed very recently, so I think this is the reason. But also, many people will tell that the budget for the research in Poland is low. But what we can do is read this type of grant design. I very like the idea that we can, for example, introduce like mandatory in the research grants position for people who are technology brokers. This is something very important in my opinion. We have centers for technology transfer at universities. They are getting better and better, but I think it's not a secret that these people are not very well paid. And this also affects the work and the outcome. But if we create a research grants position for such a person, which is well paid, and this person can be focused on this particular grant, then it can change a lot. And it has happening now. We have such programs where this position is put there, and I think it is a big chance for us.
Can I just ask you another question about that? Because I think I was hearing about this last night, about the new grant scheme that will actually include university technology transfer brokers. Can you just name the scheme and say a little bit more about that and why you think it's going to be particularly beneficial?
You mean, for example, the current grant that I have been leading, this is the IRAP project, International Research Agendas, and I have been thinking about it, and then it happened. Yeah, I was so happy. I didn't mention about this, but it happened in the program. Yeah, and we have it. I also think that very important is to maybe include some mandatory actions. Maybe researchers at the beginning they will think that it is a burden or this is like a additional task that they need to do. But I think after some time it will pay off. Like like visits, like job shadowing, for example. Yeah, like people from administration, they travel to the partners and they look how the work looks like there. And I see, at least at my field and my team, that it gives enormous impact on our administration. I think that without even support from the, let's say, above legislation, we can do something on our field by modification of the structure of the grants, if we just encourage people to do this.
That's really interesting, thanks. And perhaps we can come back to that as a question. Can I move on then and ask if, Ursula, do you want to introduce yourself?
Ursula Stachewicz. So I'm a very fan of actually fundamental science. I love fundamental science and understanding what I do. I'm a material scientist and I work with tiny little fibers, but I like to make science useful. So whatever I do, I try to make something that it's for people as materials they should be. And recently I also work for large companies like Philips Research in Netherlands, but I also work for startups in London and Queen Mary University of London. And I saw how the large company, let's say, works, small company works, And and then I thought, okay, I want to stay in academia. But I've learned a lot how things actually were happening there and what went actually mostly wrong, which is one of the best experience you can get in terms of doing later science that you want to commercialize. So, so for commercialization, I'm only starting now to learn what commercialization is, because you nicely said that commercialization is not only to get a product and sell something from science, but it has very different views of our social impacts and so on. So because of the new schemes, actually from FNP, I started to talk with the brokers and more to CTT, because first I thought that Center of Technology Transfer, I thought they only do patents and know-how, which I was aware, and we did submit few patents of our results. But I start to learn new things about commercialization, and I find it inspiring. So I think one of the things we're missing is actually awareness what commercialization is for scientists. That's what I was not aware, or I never had actually time to look at that because of other the duties that we have at universities. And but another aspect, I feel like students, because you were also mentioning about the education and starting with, let's say, younger generation to make them think about the commercialization. So when I study abroad, I realized that, oh, they teach us very useful things. And from Poland, there was a lot of knowledge we had to remember, but there was not so much practice at university. So, for example, when I studied in Germany, I said, oh, they are very, very practical in the sense what we could learn. And that it changed your attitude later, what you want to do, but also your let's say, attitude into the science, what you want to develop. And that's what I found also interesting, if that something like that could happen, that we change a little bit the education system, that we have more practice. Maybe now it's a little bit more possible, for example, because we have less and less students, and now we can spend more time, let's say, on the practical or exercises that we do in the labs, because the groups are much smaller than they used to be. And another thing that I see that's actually developing now is more the tutoring system at our university, which also helps to develop individuals into, let's say, going into more commercialization and of science if they meet the right people. So maybe that's the major points in relation to your report. Yeah.
Perhaps I can just ask you a question then before we move on to Carl. You talked about duty, what you feel is a duty within the university. Do you think that scientists perceive valorization to be a duty?
Well, yeah, maybe. Well, partially, yes.
Okay, that's good.
I disagree.
Good. We want some dissent on these panels. Is it... Actually, no, because I think this probably brings us on to another question. I'm going to, at this point, turn to Carl in that case. Carl, do you want to talk a little bit about what you've found on the report, and then perhaps we take the questions a little bit further, yeah?
Yep.
Great.
Latching on to what we just left off, to me, one of the main sort of takeaways was, as we touched on already, that the grant schemes treat valorization or commercialization as sort of a nice to have rather than a need to have. It's sort of an interesting add-on. There's nothing wrong with it, but it's not an obligation. It's not a requirement. And latching on to Natalie's suggestion that maybe there should be room in the grants to engage a tech trans bridge builder, it begs the question, should that be mandatory or should it be optional? And to me, the answer to that also comes down to what kind of project is it? Because some of the project like yours is close enough so you can sort of see the commercial output. Other project that we looked at, you really cannot. So, and one suggestion that I would like to offer to the audience is maybe what should be included in the grants is a requirement for the grantees to come up with ideas of tentative pathways, possible options something that at least opens up opportunities, not requiring them to produce it, because that obviously depends a whole lot on the project, but requiring them to present some ideas. I mean, to me, the data point that we talked to, not you, but to some of the other PIs we interviewed, they took pride in having submitted a patent application before the deadline. The reason being it was a KPI, so they ticked the box. We satisfied what we needed to do, so don't give us a hard time. We did what we promised to do. And yet they really had no perspective, ideas, reflections on what would happen to that patent afterwards, which is sort of sad in some sense, because in my mind, filing a patent is really an investment, given the money is fairly small initially, but it is an investment. And whenever you make an investment, you always want to have some idea of how you are going to recover the money you have invested. And some of the examples we saw, that was absent. And again, not because, I mean, I really do believe, maybe we disagree, but I really do believe that scientists and industry and universities all get motivated by working for the common good, for the benefit of society. So at that level, we agree. So I don't think it's about twisting somebody's arm, but I think it has a lot to do with creating awareness and putting that on the table as a topic in its own right, as an objective. And it's tempting to say, well, so then maybe just to get some comments. So which means that a scientist accepting a grant would actually take on a lifelong commitment to do his or her best to make the world a better place. I'm not sure that all scientists would be comfortable with that, but it certainly is an idea that I think is worth exploring.
I think that is something that I would like to take up with the audience too, because obviously the national grants should really be a stepping stone towards the EU grants. And when I look at Horizon applications, we really have to lay out in Horizon applications exactly who we are going to be selling to and for how much and when. The pathways to impact and the commercialization plan has to be there. And what I'm wondering partly is whether the national grant schemes at the moment are sufficiently preparing people to graduate to EU grants if they haven't been asked to do that.
And just as a metaphor, some of the people we talked to really were proud that they have completed a sprint. They didn't consider this to be a marathon. They didn't even consider it to be a relay race. So I think part of what we make true, but we highlight in the report, is that this really needs to be looked at as an escalator or a stepping stone or something. You can either take it upon yourself or you need to find somebody else. But you cannot just leave it be, file the papers, be done with it, and move on to something else. There needs to be some pathway towards continuation by somebody.
But very long in Poland, there was not like a continuous chain of funding. Yeah. So now it's better. Now there are chances. For sure, we need to improve some things, but it's better. But I established a company something like 10 years ago, and I did it only because I didn't see any other option to continue the project. And I thought, so I invested many years of my life, and now what? I need to give up. I need to start something new from the basic research. Once I reach this point, I need to do something. I cannot waste everything. So that's why I started commercialization, despite I didn't want to earn money. I just wanted to rescue the project. And I think we need like pathway, like a vision. So if I start something, I do not stop and think that I'm lost and I sacrifice a lot and I go nowhere. And this is terrifying. And I think we need to do something with that to avoid such a situation.
Again, an interesting point. I think I might come back to that one shortly. What I am going to suggest at this point is that we go over to audience comments and questions. I know we have a couple of microphones circulating. Do we have members of the audience who would like to make a point or ask a question about grant scheme design at the moment, or about third stream mission and the role of universities?
Or preferably disagree with something.
Yeah, disagree.
Yeah.
Dissent would be welcomed. Yes, please, at the back. Yeah, we'll just bring you a microphone. That will help. Thank you.
Andrzej Wiśniewski from the Institute of Physics. I think that to some extent the problem is that evaluation of valorization on a short time is much more difficult than, let's say, scientific output. We have high impact factors. Articles, that's okay, but how to evaluate on short time valorization? Sometimes it can turn out after 10 years or something. That's, I think, also some issue, which is some difficulty.
This is actually an issue that we discussed inside the team a lot, over how you actually measure impact, particularly when you've got these very long timescales involved. Carl, I'm going to come to you at this point, because I know we've talked about this before. I mean, all grant schemes put in KPIs. Everybody has to hit their KPIs. To what extent are KPIs helpful, or actually are they redundant? Or what would you do about KPIs for valorization? Are they useless? Are they beneficial?
It's tempting to say they are useless just to get the audience going, which is not entirely true. I think that we do need some measures like that. I really was terrified, as I've indicated before. We talked to several PIs with a KPI of having filed a patent application with no ID, perspective, thoughts about what to do with the invention next. So to me, that's not a very constructive KPI. I really do believe that we need to introduce evaluation methods that are much more quantitative. I certainly agree with the gentleman in the back that this is a challenge in every country, in every system. And my best suggestion is we might have some quantitative KPIs, but we need more qualitative. And in my mind, a good step in the right direction would be to make the scientists and the universities aware that there is this obligation, there is this requirement, not sort of to judge them if it hasn't all been met, but at least require some perspectives on what somebody might want to do with it, whether you do it yourself, to pursue new funding, to take the whole relay yourself, or whether you want to hand it over to somebody else, or whatever the case might be, but at least require some awareness, some explicit thoughts on how that might be. And then obviously the qualitative is much more challenging, but I think that's the only way we can really move this forward.
But if I may say something, even if the funding push you to tick the box and do the patent, filing the patent, which was sometimes in my case, but it came out with patents they actually by accident later they developed, or we filed it, we got it, and now we have even further ideas. So I mean, even pushing sometimes that without at the moment when we were filing that with a huge plan what to do next, it is another opportunity that we will find out maybe later to use it. So I'm just saying that maybe it does not happen at the moment we file it, but sometimes it just takes time for scientists to realize what they have, and we can apply for more funding to realize more things. Yeah, just comment.
Any question, Marties? Sorry. I was just going to...
Thank you. I was just going to hazard a thought, because we had a very relevant point, which is, the publication of science in high impact journals, absolutely what all scientists want to do. But in response to what I've been hearing, I would suggest we should build in the public communication of science. In other words, why would this be interesting to the public, or why would this be interesting to policymakers? Why would this be interested to health services or environmental services? So to have, it could be just a qualitative KPI, but that actual inclusion, not just your publication in Nature or Science or whatever, but also have you put out publications which engage the wider public?
And I think this fits perfectly with what happens in the Horizon Europe programs, where we have to communicate, we have to disseminate. And it's not even a case of have you, it's a case of how did you, and how many times, and to who, and what happened. So again, if we are going to try and help more Polish researchers to graduate to the framework programs, this is something where perhaps some of the funding agencies could help with that stepping stone by making it a requirement that you can see it. One question I would put on the back of that, though, I think it's easy to put a lot of the weight of this on an individual researcher or a small research team. To what extent should this be a collective responsibility? I mean, should it be a case that the university, the Centre for Technology Transfer and other organisations should have a collective responsibility to meet broader KPIs? Please, Cole, yeah.
I'd even take it one step further. I mean, there is a what I'm finding is that there seems to be a wider gap. I come back to the gap analysis. I think there seems to me to be a wider gap in Poland than in many other countries between academia and industry. And we have talked and also already mentioned that certainly the academics need to be aware of the commercial world. So clearly there is a need on that side, and we heard that from the panel as well. I'd also argue that if you're going to bridge the gap, you're better off starting from both sides. So I think that what I've seen in Norway, in my country, is one particular mechanism whereby the Research Council provides financial support for PhD candidates in industry working at universities. My point is bridging the gap, narrowing the gap between industry, between the commercial world and the academic world. I think there is a lot to be gained. And one particular mechanism is this, as I just mentioned in Norway, there is obviously others. Adjunct professors is one aspect of it, inviting people from the outside world onto campus, strengthening alumni. There is a whole number of efforts that people have applied elsewhere. And it was a little bit concerning that this gap seems to be wider in Poland, and maybe this is one, maybe it has to do with history and has to do with a whole bunch of things. But I think Poland would be well served by finding ways to bridge that gap both ways. Academics obviously should take pride when their candidates move into industry, and maybe they should recruit new scientists from the rest of the world, but really transferring knowledge on two legs, again, is my favorite, and I think it needs to go both ways.
I also wanted to add that in Poland we have not only gap between academia and business, but we have also gap between research and society. Still, society does not know what we are doing, who we are. The archetype of the scientist is like a strange man with a strange hair.
White hair.
Yeah, maybe also better. Definitely, I'm not a scientist. And what else? And they are doing unnecessary things in a strange way. This is what the regular person in our country probably think about the researchers. And I think there is a lot of work at the basic that we need to do. We need to go to schools, to kindergarten. We need to talk to people. We need to meet and explain why we are doing this. We not necessarily need to say what we are doing and what are the methods. We just need to say why. What is the mission? What is the aim? How you can benefit from this research? And we are doing this for you. And this is missing. Yes.
I want to come back to the issue of whose responsibility this should be. Sorry, was that? Yes, go for it. That's good. Please.
I'm Anna Kaczorowska from University of Gdańsk, and I would like to touch upon what you just said, because this is what we have been doing for the last, I would say, 15 years almost, thinking that we should invest in very, very young people, so also including some workshops, very basic workshops with very basic research, with children, starting with children actually at every educational level. And it works great, I would say. But you have mentioned also a motivation problem, and I think what we have experienced is that it's not appreciated by our authorities. So from the authorities, university authorities' point of view, it's okay to have it in some kind of report when it's necessary to show this activity, but otherwise the real communicated message is that you're losing time and you could have been doing your papers, your research, and giving some points. And it's very difficult to get younger people getting engaged in this because they see it straight away. And the problem is I would say, even worse now. So I do believe that that's our basic duty, that's our mission. And I think it is also a joy, and also what I noticed, and I think we have been experiencing this as well, because we both met were involved at European Scientist Night, is that it's also very good for us to meet at these meetings, because it's kind of different ambience, and we can freely discuss about our topics, and there are already some things that we see, some venues for new collaboration across various disciplines. So it's we often say that it's of course aimed at and targeted at the general public, but it's also very, very helpful to researchers and scientists as well.
Yeah, I totally agree. And you want what I wish? I would have something at the university, like a special unit dedicated for the research dissemination, let's say. And it could be like every week there is like a workshop organized. We have so many departments in our university, for example. And if somebody took once a month this duty and show something to the children, to the students from the primary school, something interesting, it wouldn't be a burden, because there is a lot of researchers at the university. And if the schools knows that at the university in Gdańsk, for example, we have such a unit, there will be like a trips, and it's not a problem, I think.
But this is actually what is happening in the Faculty of Biology. So this is on a regular basis. But generally, but there is some kind of small program. So the schools are visiting, and the building is even so furnished so that we could organize such quite big.
So if you need some support, lobby, you can contact us.
Yes, that's great. Yes, that's great. But the appreciation of impact, targeted research impact to society, to science communication, this is really missing at the leadership level. And if it's missing at the leadership level, it's very difficult to sustain it as a sustainable way.
Because if the society understands the research is important, and also the funds for the research growth, this is how it should be. Yeah.
Yeah, but the communication is crucial.
So this actually echoes one of the things that came up as a finding, where we would say that rectors and managers at universities certainly don't block people, but they're not necessarily strongly supporting people who want to undertake support for valorization. How can that be changed? I mean, at what level do rectors feel a sense of responsibility for valorization within their organizations? How can that be stimulated? Any comments or any examples from how other countries have done this?
Oh, actually, sorry, I wanted to say something before. I don't have any example to what you are asking about now. Just a short anecdote, personal one actually. My daughter has just graduated from Warsaw University, one of the departments with huge application potential. And they had a course in entrepreneurship. And the course, what they did during the course was actually reporting on the grant possibilities, grant opportunities from different agencies like FNP, NCN, or NCBR. So this is entrepreneurship as it's taught at the biggest university in Poland, at one of the most, I would say, important faculties. How to get
funding opportunities.
Yes, how to get a grant from FNP or how to get a grant on NCN, the list of grants. So and I think this is something that should be quite easy to change, because a course in entrepreneurship, I mean, it doesn't have to be Stanford level, but something probably more advanced than looking for grants. So that's one thing. And if I may, to go back to the previous point about KPIs. So we have as a foundation, we ask for patent applications as a KPI. We are not happy about it, and we realize it doesn't mean much if someone files an application, patent application. But we did an evaluation asking our grantees what they think about it, how difficult it was for them, whether they have any other plans connected with the patent application, and whether they think it's a good way to somehow bring their research closer to the market. And they said that, well, the answers differed, but they said that actually that made them think that maybe this is something they should consider. So I think that we are still not very happy about this KPI, but there might be a positive impact in the longer term.
Well, I would agree with that, because as somebody who works as a technology broker, if you don't file a patent, I'm not happy. So if we don't have one, there's a problem. I think I would just be trying to emphasise it's the beginning of a process and not the end of a research grant. So please go on filing, but see it as being the beginning of the following stage. Any more comments on that? Yes, please go for it.
Comment, because I was actually one of FNP grantee with a project, and I had to write a patent, and I realized that writing patent is much easier than writing papers. So we're writing now more patents, actually. So I've learned something as a positive thing, and even idea that we didn't think that we could patent. After discussion with the CTT, they realized this is something useful. And sometimes if in terms of our, let's say, social media thing, we say something, we developed something that is very useful, for example, for firemen. And then I receive a call, why you didn't patent? Now you made it public, so you cannot patent this anymore. So it's actually, we collaborate much more now after being pushed to write a first patent. It just started, so.
So on that side, I think that is positive. Yes, please. The physicist at the back.
Well, yeah, I think that the problem is not all on the level of rector or director of the institute, but in fact, in some sense, on the level of ministry. We have something what is called the categorization of scientific units. One of the field which is taken into account is valorization, let's say. But this is very bad defined what it really means. For example, this is not really the problem of rector of director popularization of physics. I do it also, but directors say we have nothing benefit in categorization. That's fine what you are doing, but institute will have no benefits. So I think that in some sense this impact of valorization on categorization of the institution will help a lot. At the moment, I think it's a big problem.
And does that come down to the metrics that are currently being used? You said categorize the institute. In terms of its performance, or can you expand on categorization?
This categorization is that you can have so-called A+, A, B, and C category. Depending on your category, you will get higher or lower budget. So that's somehow very important for the existence of the institution? What category it will get? And
yeah, so that's evaluation, and then it's driven with certain, let's say, numbers of publishing papers per researcher. So the motivation for Dean, for example, to motivate people, it's not to file patent or do commercialization, but just publish whatever, because you cannot be this kind of N0 and then the whole categorization, you get lower number and then less money. So that also comes to the point how you are judged at work, what is important for them, and then how the motivation looks in terms of commercialization. It's kind of additional thing they do, and so it's not a priority in that sense.
In fact, science popularization is taken into account, but it is very difficult to have like a good score for that, because everything needs to be you need metrics. If you have like a lecture online, it will be counted how many times somebody opened it. Yeah? But if you have one lecture in front of the kids, it's only one lecture. It's nothing in this metrics. So it should be somehow changed to pays off. And also there is a problem probably with legislation in Poland, because universities are not supposed to earn money. They are public institutions, and all the universities declare that they want to commercialize, but at some point when you make it serious, they tell you this: we are not for earning money. So how to do it? Earn money without earning money? I have no idea. Yes, so we are in kind of yeah.
This goes to discussion we will have.
Yes, over the legislation. Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. Let's leave that one for later if we can. Yes, I understand the conundrum, although I've always said that provided you reinvest the money, you're still not for profit. You've just invested your profits. But I think that a lot of people will say, but we aren't supposed to be creating revenues anyway. Yeah. Any other comments from the audience at this stage? Online, yes, please, Michael.
Yes, we have at least a couple of active participants online. And one question, perhaps a couple of questions concern the same issue. How to close the gap between scientists and society, meaning that how to include of non-scientists in the grant requirements of schemes, or perhaps participation of public, how can be structured, and a detailed perhaps question what Professor Trzankowska meant saying about job shadowing. Is it something going the same direction, or can be used more widely and by recommendation for schemes? Thank you. That would be a question.
So I should probably answer this specific question. So job shadowing is when your team goes to the partner institution and just watch the work of the same team, like the team of the same profile. For example, if it is Center for Technology Transfer, our people go, for example, to partner institution, and they listen how the work is organized, how the communication with the researchers looks like, who is responsible for what, and they are just like a shadow, follow the people who are working there. And they can also have some very inspiring ideas that can be implemented in our university, despite this is a different system, but many things can be implemented. And it really changed a lot, this kind of visits. And it is quite available because we have Erasmus plus system, everybody can apply. And of course, also in grants, we can have such possibilities.
About the inclusion of non-scientists, or encourage public participation in scientific endeavors.
I have also been looking for activities that are ongoing. For example, I always interested if somebody invented something that can, of course, we know the workshops, we know like Nights of Science, Nights of Biology, that we have in Poland. But I also found that there is something called Zooniverse. I don't know if you are familiar with this. This is like a platform where researchers and non-researchers can meet, and they can create like a joint project. It can be something simple. It does not have to be from biotechnology. It can be social sciences. So everybody can contribute, can give the input, can send some information, some observations. It can be also related to the observation of animals. You can make a photo, send them, and be a part of something done with the researchers. Of course, it also needs time and it needs your dedication. But I think if we can meet and make a brainstorming, we could find something that would be really beneficial and not a burden to the researchers.
But they organize like a festival of science in Copernicus Centers over here in Warsaw, and it was open to everyone. And actually, everyone afterwards, like I was presenting things, could come and talk with different ideas. I thought it was brilliant, and people from outside just could come, and if someone is interested, I think they have possibility to find things, to talk to scientists. So there are many festivals, events going on.
And how about the UK model, like the PPI, which is Public and Patient Involvement? So for the National Institute of Health Research, one of the requirements is that for each grant, there should be a patient or public representative, so someone who is in the steering committee and who has a voice and can help in translating the research results into benefits for society. And also the PPI members would be on the board selecting the project, so they would kind of put a value on a project in terms of perceived benefits for the society or patients. But I suppose that's easier for medical studies rather than physics.
This one is fascinating because this one has been relatively new to me, and I can't speak for the UK, but I've been to a conference recently in Ireland on this one. Got invited to the Republic of Ireland, which is great. And this, I was seeing what the patients felt this had potentially huge impact for them. Having a voice, being involved very early on in design, definitely in valorization. I felt somewhat awkward that I hadn't known about this before, frankly, but it seemed to be a movement being driven very much by University College Dublin. This is something perhaps where we could even get this into the report a bit. I thought it was a really good example of involving stakeholders that before were being told, well, this is for your benefit. We're now being told you should actually be part of the project.
What would be the benefit?
Yes, what would they like, and how should even the research be designed so they had a voice all the way through. So thank you for raising that one, because I think that's one we can come back to.
On that, the first is I'm not surprised that the Irish are pursuing this because it's a European Commission. I mean, I chair a number of the healthcare panels, funding panels for the European Commission, and the inclusion of the patients is almost de rigueur in terms of grant awarding. So that's built in, and so that's I think that's reflected there. The other side of this, and I'm glad you started by mentioning smoking. Archie Cochrane and the Cochrane Collaboration, which is actually an international organisation based in Oxford, is what informs NICE as to what is good medical practice, what is bad medical practice. I do a lot of work with the Cochrane Collaboration, and it's not because it's 500 yards from, or 500 metres from my home. It's just actually that's the field I work in. And that's broadly called evidence-based medicine. It is one of those wonderful areas of valorization where we're not talking about commercial benefit. What we're actually talking about is societal benefit in terms of what are the best medical practices. And yes, I mean, that's now absolutely involves the patient. and that is enshrined in what the European Commission does.
I can see that we're out of time, and I know that we want to come slightly back onto time. Any final comments from anybody? Because otherwise what I'm going to try and do is briefly sum up, partly because I'm supposed to be taking notes. So what I'm going to do is briefly sum up in the hope that somebody can write this down and tell me if I've...
Can I just add one, latching on to the tobacco? There was just on the news this morning or yesterday that now, I think in the UK, parents are buying dumb cell phones to their kids. There is a growing awareness in my country about the implications of kids using smartphones, spending most of their wake hours and even in bed. Point being, is this the new? Can we learn from the tobacco back when? How will people 5 years from now think of us in terms of kids spending their life, getting meaning from life from a phone? I don't have the answer. That is a fascinating topic.
I think we're being told 1 hour good, more than 60 minutes bad. Just then to try and sum up, if I can, we've been looking at the issue of grant scheme design, but also to an extent the role of the third stream mission within universities. I think what we do here is that it is very complex in terms of how researchers will either be pushed in different directions to work on valorization by their institutes. Does it contribute to the overall ranking of the institution, and has that got the attention of the rector or the director as a result of that? Do the researchers actually have the skills to be able to go out and talk to the wider community and go and communicate with what they're doing, even if their rector doesn't feel it's enormously important that they do that? And I come back to the issue of, and who should be supporting researchers to build the skills that allows them to go out and talk to people? Is that a job for the universities feeling that it's a duty for the researchers to do it, so they need the skills? Or should it come back to the granting agencies who should say, if we actually want our grants to have more impact, if we want people to be able to graduate to Horizon Europe, within the grant scheme, we should be helping people actively to build skills so they can communicate, they can think about commercialization, they can think about dissemination, and that's something that perhaps ought to run alongside a grant scheme. Have I missed anything important on that one, or should I hand back over to the colleagues to close this first session? Thank you.
Thank you very much to all the discussants of this session. And now let me invite you to the break, because we need a work-life balance too. So now we deserve a break. And yes, coffee, and also please have a snack. And we'll make it a bit shorter and meet here 1:10. Yeah, and make up the delay in the air. They are already discussing and started without the signal. Yes, it's only that we all want to hear it. So here is the second panel, and it will be also led by Lisa Cowie.
Yes.
There's no lights on this one. That's just worrying, really. Okay. Thank you. I hope everybody managed to get something to eat and drink in the break. The food is very good. It's always nice here. Our second panel is going to look more at legal and regulatory issues. And I'm glad that we have sort of an expanded panel. This is an area where I think we're always aware it can create a lot of barriers to research, commercialization, and valorization. It's also something it's always quite difficult for the panel really to get inside. I mean, legal systems are quite complex. We often get comments from people, but we're not quite sure what's going on. So I think from this point of view, it's really helpful that we have a a group here of people who are directly under legislation and regulation, as well as people who've worked on it externally. So we'll look at regulation, we'll look at ecosystems as well, if that works for us as a panel. So what I'm going to suggest is, perhaps if you don't mind, Hugh will start at the other end, yeah? And if you would just briefly introduce who you are, and then feel free to talk for sort of 3 minutes or so about your views in this particular area, yeah? Great, thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Maciej Wojtkowski, and I'm chairing International Center for Translational Eye Research. So this is one of the IRAPs founded by Foundation for Polish Science, and we are also growing into the Center of Excellence based on the Teaming of Excellence project that we just acquired. My overall impression when I read the report was that, yes, there is a lot of work to do. So from the legal perspective, and I think one of the crucial things about the valorization or monetization is that this process is broader than what can be done by individual single institution. And this is the main source of the complexity here, that it cannot be really implemented very efficiently from the bottom-up approach. Because from the bottom-up approach, I think we are fine. There are, startups, there are smart researchers that can start entrepreneurship activity, collect young people and motivate them to work in the companies. But the point is that this is only a small number. So to make it more systematic, it requires really a lot of efforts to regulate this issue and also to compose such activities in the overall economy bloodstream in the country. So in this case, in Poland. And I think this is completely missing now. And also I think the tobacco example that we discussed also during last panel, it is very interesting, but it's also an example of failure because it took 75 years from the solid data that were published to the point where people started really to believe that this is not healthy habit. So with that, it also shows that the valorization is not the process per se. It's not an isolated process. It is just part of the bigger process, larger process. So if this discovery of the influence of tobacco on health would be followed up by the proper actions, social actions, then probably people would stop smoking much earlier. So, and the same is with the economy. So when we start valorization process, we need to have in mind what will be the end of this process. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense because you can spend a lot of money and waste this money completely. So that's why the regulatory issues are really critical for that there will be a point of view that will be a little bit broader than single institution and will link it to the general social or economical activity in the country.
Thank you. Loritz, would you like to introduce yourself and sort of give a summary of what you think are the most important aspects here you'd like to discuss?
Yes, I will try to do. Some of you know that I am also chairperson of the EDUP program in Poland and has been since the beginning of that program and even before when the evaluation of the Polish higher education and research system was made in 2016 and 17. I still think I don't understand Poland. I do think that coming back several times a year, I see major changes taking place. Maybe changes that you don't realize, you who live in it every day. For example, this meeting, I'm surprised of the age average because it's much lower than I expected. And the color of the room has improved a lot since 2016.
It's the capacity.
I mean, these are good signals for an innovation system. But I also like, I'll say a little bit about the legal framework because this is of course important. But first of all, I would like to remind us all that an innovation system is a system. Sometimes it's called an ecosystem. As a biologist, I know that ecosystems are kind of stochastic. Nothing happens in a linear fashion, and it depends on many high diversity. High diverse ecosystems are stronger than low diverse systems. Things happen, it's unforeseeable when it happens. Innovation systems are a little bit like that. And I do think that the tone of how we address the Polish innovation system is too linear and too much focused on individual people. The system as such is not yet a mature knowledge innovation system. It's improving. The law, the Act 2.0, you probably think it's not very good, but it's much better than the prior one that the shifting governments tried to change for many years. But the 2.0, yes, it needs a revision soon, but it's better than was before. Okay, I think that it's also fair to say that most research in Poland takes place in universities, national research institutes, and academy institutes. Some in the private sector, but still not more than in the public sector. And if you look at the OECD recommendations and also EU, one would think that the private sector should probably take 2/3 at least, maybe more. And so you are behind in that sense. The private sector is not yet mature enough in terms of taking the major share of innovation. I think some of this could be fixed with from legal point of view, but also maybe stimulated some of the change from funders. I know too much about your universities to really want to speak about it, but still, do we have any rectors here today? No.
They will hear.
And so what about leadership? I don't think that the leadership is focused on something else than on innovation. I think that's fair to say. I'm not quite sure what it's focused on. I know this is not polite to say, but governance is very classic and very academic. It's not geared to a modern knowledge society, governance of universities, and this is something that should be addressed somehow down the line in the legal system. Administrative support, I think we have in the report many cases, and also heard from you, many cases of insufficient administrative support or ineffective support, maybe even unprofessional support. But who is in charge of getting this changed? I still look for the rectors and other leaders. Age profile is improving, but we know the salary scale is not conducing in terms of getting younger brains into the system. And I have met top management of one of the universities from which some of you are coming, one of the major technical universities, and they were lamenting the brain drain to industry. Wow. If a technical university think it's a loss, if some of the best young people go to industry, doesn't sound right in my ears. So I'm optimistic on part of the Polish system because you have improved it a lot, and there's, of course, a lot more work to do. Role of research councils, I don't think research councils can fix systems. They can stimulate changes and maybe facilitate bridges and so forth, but probably not the change. In order to have major change, you need the institutions and the government to also come in. And finally, maybe we should focus much more on other types of technologies than high-tech. it's fashionable to look at biotech and to ICT and so forth, but why don't we see more innovation based on one of the foundations of Polish economy is your great agricultural production? Why don't we see more innovation? Why, whenever time I come, I have four or five cheeses to choose between. Why not 500? And same on sausages. And I mean, I'm not trying to joke. I'm not trying to say, don't forget that there are many other areas of the economy that could be innovated, let alone the society at large. So, work to do.
Like then, if I maybe, yeah, sure. So my name is Magda Winiarska, and I'm just a typical researcher, typical Polish researcher, and I would say a final user of the regulations that are created by the administration. So I think I can share my point of view and my experience based on two things. One is that I transferred my group from the big Medical University of Warsaw to the small institution Polish Academy of Science. And I would tend to disagree that we need like global plan for, I would disagree a little bit with you regarding this global plan that we only need to, we already have this bottom-up activities. I see that it's, although both institutions, so Medical University of Warsaw and the institute that I'm working now, they are physically very close, just across the street. They are completely different and suffer from completely different problems in terms of administration regulations. Big institutions in Poland, like universities, they suffer from huge administration problems and tenders, and it really happens that if you order something, you wait 3 or 4 months. So you already forget why you decided to order this. And it's not, it happens very often at huge institutions. At small, it's not a problem, but there are many others, so like it's not effective in terms of leading the grants, support from the administration, because this administration is small. Usually they don't speak good English. So there are really simple but critical problems for implementation. So it was my first impression in terms of huge university and small institution. And the other impression is that I have both grants that are funded by Polish institution and by European Commission. So what is the experience of the end user like me from the European Commission and Polish institution? From the European Commission, nothing matters, only the result. So it's only about what I would achieve when I implement the proposal. In Polish institution, what doesn't matter. Only matters how, who I will employ. What I need to do is I need to plan a budget, and I'm pretty sure you cannot even imagine how detailed budget Polish researchers prepare. We calculate, the number of pipettes and whatever we need to prepare the budget for the proposal. It's only the proposal. It could happen that we will not buy this stuff, right? But we need to prepare. So European Commission, it's freedom. It's freedom and trust. In Polish institution, it's just regulations. So what I really take care about in Polish implementation of Polish grants, it's how did I post did I prepare the tender properly? It's only the main problems that I have as a researcher, only regulations.
That's interesting. Let's come back to that in a bit. But Hugh, if I can just finally move on to you and ask you to sort of reflect a bit on what you've seen over the course of the project and your experience more widely outside Poland.
Okay.
So maybe if I just can, it was, sorry.
No.
It's very easily visible. I also have the grant that I was sitting. It was in the cooperation Polish and Norwegian, right? So the one that we are also discussing. So Norwegian partners, they cannot even imagine. I mean, what workload is put on Polish researchers. So what is done by Polish researchers is unimaginable to Norwegian researchers, because this is typically the stuff that is done by administration.
So that sounds to me like a good practice that we ought to be capturing for the report, to say this is what the administration ought to be doing, perhaps for Polish researchers. Okay, thank you. Then that's a good point, and we take that one away and look at it. Hugh, your impressions.
Okay, just the briefest of introductions to myself, and that is I'm by training a biophysicist. I studied in Cambridge, taught and researched in Oxford. Since when I've spent most of my career commercializing technology, but not just technology, but also, as I've indicated, for example, working with the likes of the Cochrane collaboration, which is to benefit the healthcare system. My impression was very much that we had a number of structural, therefore what I would describe as legal and regulatory issues to deal with. First thing I'd comment, though, before I get into that, is there is the wonderful comment that it's not possible to govern a country with 500 cheeses, which was Charles de Gaulle. And the second comment, which I made earlier today to someone, was about we do not choose to do these things because they're easy. We do them because they are hard, which is John F. Kennedy about the moonshot program. And that really is, I think, where you are. You've got some difficult things you have to resolve, but there's value in tackling those problems. And one of the interesting things I find around the world is that the structure of universities affects the possibility of valorization and what can be done. Different countries, their universities have different status. The particular example I was thinking of was France. And France, like many countries, academics are civil servants. They work effectively for the government. Now, there's a general rule for civil servants can't trade. Therefore, universities can't trade, which is the point that we raised earlier. And this is a structural issue. How do you get past that issue? Now, the simple answer is France changed the law in the year 2000, because they realized that Germany, the UK, Italy were all making great strides in valorization activities, and France was getting left behind. And it was because of structure, because of legal issues. So the first thought is on that. And that then feeds down. What are the rules and regulations around universities? Because those are what your rectors are going to respond to. Their responsibilities are to follow the law. They don't want to run foul of laws on procurement. They don't want to fall foul of other missions that they're supposed to focus on. Therefore, you need to consider, is the legal structure appropriate to where you want to be now as part of the European Union and what the other members of the European Union are doing? That's maybe looking top down. There's a bottom-up aspect to this as well, which is to do with what we found talking to people when we were doing the meetings in Gdansk and in Wrocław and so on, that there seemed to be a certain amount of uncertainty about what academics could do. Can I create a spin-out company? How can I commercialize something? What is the amount of work I can put into valorization when I've got responsibilities within the university? And one of the issues there is to come up with some clarity on the regulations so that the university knows what is happening and the academics know what they can do, what they're allowed to do and where they might have to negotiate and where they have to go outside of the university. So I think those are the issues that have been raised, and I'd almost throw it back to you to ask questions about that.
Thank you. Which is almost an immediate starting point. But what I want to do actually is sort of put that question almost straight back to the panel, because sometimes changing the law has unforeseen outcomes, make things negative when you thought it was going to be positive. And we know that Poland has changed its law a lot since about 2018, when I think the last law on scientific and research activity was changed. But if you could pinpoint one thing where at the moment you think that changing the legislation would be beneficial, where would you be focusing? Perhaps I can come back. We start there.
That's a very tricky question, because I think there's no only single point that we should raise. So it's it will be very hard to pinpoint. But I think that one of the very, very general problem of Polish academia is that the institutes or universities are isolated, and they are kind of autonomous organizations that are very often fighting with each other for being better evaluated, having more resources, and so on and so on. So they are still operating in the economy of fixed pie. So that there is a fixed pie and we can just take a share for us, and more shares we take, we are more happy. But the reality is that the modern economy is about building and introducing new quality and new values with new products and new services. And Polish academia is completely out of it. I think it's outdated. So how to change this? I have no idea.
Okay. Actually, if I may, I'm going to come to Magdalena next as a Polish representative. Again, if there was one thing at the moment on the legislative or regulatory side within your university or institute.
I'm not sure it's the right comment, but I would opt for less regulations.
So you would reduce the number of
because there are many regulations in Polish science, and what we are mainly doing is how to tackle with all these obstacles, because many of these regulations are just obstacles to make research.
And why do you think there are so many? Why do you have so many regulations here? What's behind that?
Maybe it's just the culture and our history and lack of trust, because it's lack of trust. Because if you, for example, in my European Commission project, again, I can employ anyone who I think would be a good asset to the team. It does not matter PhD, not PhD, whoever. In Polish grant, if I applied for postdoc, I can only employ postdoc. No one will trust me that it's not possible, for example, to find a postdoc now, so I will transfer money. It's not possible. I would say it's trust issue, right? Because I will use this money in a wrong way.
And trust is something I want to come back to in a moment then, but Lauritz, I can see that you... Would you like to respond on that one perhaps first, and I come to you?
I don't think you can legislate about trust first, but I do think there are some... If I closed my eyes and was dreaming, I would first of all merge the three universities of Gdansk. Then I would merge the Medical University of Warsaw into Warsaw University and the new Faculty of Medicine. Then I would start a process moving academy institutes into universities. And I would end up probably having 10 world-class universities in Poland, visible from the outside and attractive from the inside. For some reason, this doesn't happen, maybe because of historical reasons. Even in Gdansk, for where the universities are within 1 kilometer and collaborate.
The Union of Universities to the first.
Fahrenheit. Yes, but this is too timid. You still have 3 rectors. I have been a rector of a large university, and I can assure you, we merged 7 institutions in, and we did not have 7 rectors. So there are certain things that can be done. But in terms of one thing, I would change the law and make universities independent within the public sector, receiving a block grant every year and having a majority of external board members who would appoint the rector. No elected, but a selected rector, I would think would help. But this is about, it may take time. It will come.
Can we take a response here and then I come to you, Hugh?
Just as a short response to, I absolutely agree with you, but you need to remember that in Poland, you can make a lot of changes, but there's one equation which is important. The numbers of rectors is constant.
Hugh, did you want to respond on that one too?
There is a solution to that. You just donate the Mercedeses to them when they retire, and
Okay, I think in response, I think there are 2 important issues. One is trust and the other is risk. And I think the trust issue, you're quite right to identify it as at least in part historical, because I've worked in a number of countries, and those that we would define as having been under the Soviet bloc, there was definitely an issue of trust, and it leads to bureaucracy. Masses and mass, everything has to be defined, because then you can be punished for making a mistake here. And similarly, it also then takes you to the issue of risk. And when I look at comfort with taking risk, happiness to take risk, I look at the United States, where people take ludicrous risks, but they're happy. I go to the UK, to Scandinavia, and they're reasonably comfortable with risk. And then as I move eastward, it's got to be safe. And I understand the rector's positions in the sense of, we don't want to take risks beyond those which are legally defined. And we saw that in some of the feedback that we got. So I think there's explanations. But the other side of that is you have to start building trust. You have to start having greater levels of trust in your academics, in their capabilities, because you have some amazing academics. I've worked with academics from Poland, and frankly, they tend to be what I call a little bit humble, and actually they should be a lot more confident. So trust in your academics, and then develop the possibility, things can go wrong. Don't be frightened of that. If things go wrong, you learn something, you do it differently the next time. But working on a basis everything has got to be right every time and you never make a mistake is not a way to grow.
Sure. You want to make it? Yes, please, and then I'm going to ask another question. Go for it.
It's something we introduced in the EDU program. The international panel insisted on not receiving metrics every year, because we know that the system here is world-class in terms of developing numbers. We wanted to know what happened. So this is why we have a different way of monitoring the implementation. We are having annual conferences where we have the different universities to explain to each other what they did, rather than metrics. We know that we can get all the metrics we would like, but we don't care. We want really to know a little bit about what happens, the cultural change.
I'm interested in the direction that this panel has moved in, because in my experience, when you're looking at barriers, you very often find that you have concrete legal barriers. But in fact, trust is an enabler. So you can take out all the barriers, the legislative ones, but in fact, the system doesn't actually change unless you have trust so things can move forward. And I think Loritz has given us a really concrete example of how you can start to build trust. You don't ask people, what was the final result? You say, what have you been doing? What I'd very much like to hear from the audience is what you think ought to be changed, particularly, for example, within grant schemes, that would start to build trust across the system.
If I may, Piotr Międuszacki, Gdańsk University of Technology. I would say that trust, this is the number one. And the second one is the flexibility. Give the academics some flexibility. Performing researchers, many times we don't know what we obtain. We sometimes can go in that end and we have to come back and try another thing. When everything should be settled, should be planned, scheduled, sometimes it is very difficult to change anything. And for example, the response from the organ like NCBR or another funding the grants is very late. We have to wait for this several months, a few months, for example, and it takes time, too much time. We should know that it is possible to be to some extent flexible, of course, within the budget, because this is the most important, but we can change, we can exchange one thing by other, some researchers, but another researchers, and then continue the project. And we should, this is the coming back to number one, the trust to the academy, to the project leader who is responsible for the project.
So if I have this right, a mixture of flexibility, alternative outcomes, and there was a third one that had come out, which will come back to me in a moment. Oh, a rapid response from agencies, rapid response. So those would be three of the things that would help this. Okay, thank you. Can we?
Yeah.
Okay, respond.
Yes, go for it.
The interesting thing is that the flexibility you've been talking about, if you look at the European Commission, you can make a change request so that you get partway through your grant and you find that there's a need to do something in a different way, different technology, different outcome is expected. You just make a case, discussion, and it usually is within the budget, but in some cases you can even get additional budget to accommodate that. We have similar arrangements in the UK, and so I think there are models out there that could be adopted in Poland.
Okay, well, again, we're talking about stepping stones towards the Horizon Europe projects in that case. Good. Please,
actually, can I just ask, would you allow your colleague behind you briefly? And then we'll come back to you. Thank you.
I am actually very surprised that my colleagues from the NCBR are not taking up their voice, because what I understand is that in the previous edition of the EA and Norway grants, they were much more flexible than in this edition, but after an audit from the grants, we are less flexible in this edition.
Can you comment? That's an interesting point. Give the gentleman a microphone and we'll force a response out of him.
Yes, thank you for this remark, Barbara. So, I like very much one sentence that was said before, that it's not the research councils to solve all the problem of the system. This is the job of the system creators, which we are not. And we are suffering the same as the researchers, because we have to obtain all the rules, and even if we would like to be pro-beneficiary, we cannot, because there are several audits, several institutions that control our actions, and even we start with a simple initial idea, and then, we find out that some things are just impossible to be introduced. Even they are sound, even they are good for this, for everybody. Then audit comes, and the findings are not necessarily in line of our initial idea, and then we have to be more strict for our beneficiaries. So we are in the system as the rest of this of this room.
So does that mean that you would also find it useful if there were alternative outcomes? If you were able to say to the auditors, well, these are the outcomes that we originally thought there would be, but we have alternative outcomes, and these alternative outcomes have actually been as good, if not better. Would that be beneficial?
It's, it's difficult to answer that question straight. I believe that there must be finally a time when we try to do something, but still we need decisions and permission to do it. So I believe there is potential, there are ways, but
more trust.
Yeah, more trust. That's the keyword, and that's the word that is we hear very often in the cooperation with Norwegian side, and it's very important to have it. And there is a truly lack of trust in Polish system.
Interesting. Does anybody else want to come back on trust?
One example, because it's impossible in Poland. Yesterday morning, before I went to the airport, I had a Teams meeting with a new director, relative new director in the ministry, the vice director. And this is as it has been for 4 or 5 years, in complete trust. I give my frank opinion, they listen, we come to an agreement, and we move on exactly like it would have happened in my own country. So it is possible to also, it's about daring, to be there, to have trust in each other. I just wanted to say that. And then I have a couple of other minor things, suggestions. We can take them later.
Somebody? You would like a microphone? Yeah, absolutely. We'll get a microphone down to the end.
Yes.
Hi. I'm not a real scientist, like social sciences. I understand that not real sciences, but I thought
not in this room. Social sciences are sciences.
But I just want to make one comment, which listening to you for a couple of hours, kind of, in Poland, there's no way you can do research unless you have grants. So the role of funding agencies such as NCN, NCBR, all these others is very different from other scientific environments where I function. Where as a scientist, I'm a full professor. I have strictly zero research fund for fun. I can't get a PhD student. I cannot get a postdoc. I cannot get travel funding for a conference, right? So if we want to do anything at all, we need to apply for grants. And therefore, the role of grants in our system is very different from obtaining third-party funding in, say, Norway, Germany, the UK, or France, where as a scientist, some bases you still have available. Even your postdocs have some funding available. And only if you need to build a lab, you want a bigger team, you want to buy some extra data, then you need to apply for funding. And so my sense is part of the discussion you're having right now is mixing those two levels. The one level is we have zero money and zero trust on a daily basis. And then this overlaps also to this additional world of applying for grants, which for us is the only world. But for you guys, it's like an additional thing that scientists can do. So mixing those things causes like misunderstanding what the trust means. I don't get funding not because there's no funding, but because nobody trusts I will be able to use it, right? And that perpetuates to agencies not trusting universities to use it, and universities not trusting academics to use it. And this perpetuation of mistrust is just driven by the fact that we cannot do science unless it's externally funded.
So to make sure I understand this, because I think this is a really important point, that if you had more freedom to operate without having to apply for a grant, you'd be able to demonstrate to the world that you were trustful when you turned up for a grant. Right. Okay, thank you. That's an important point on that one. Before we move back...
Is that problem caused because of lack of understanding of what valorization really is? Because you cannot develop the society without social sciences and the interaction with the society, and it is part of valorization to interact with the society. So I think the work needs to be done on what is really innovation in a country. It's much wider than what leads to direct a new business. I think it was mentioned in the former panel as well.
So I'm an economist. We actually do new businesses, but I understand what you're saying. I think the point is, probably the university stopped giving scientists any say, any discretion, any agency over funding because somebody was abusing it. And so they learned a lesson. And this is the story of audits, right? You do something wrong and then everybody else is forbidden from doing all those things as well. So it's like somebody violating the rules and then everybody else suffering and then mistrust perpetuating further on. So this probably, I think, like historically speaking, that probably the way it happened. We build more regulation because somebody's abusing the trust that is there to begin with. But it's a different thing if you're working only with few scientists that really want third-party funding from outside, apply for big projects, really do something that's worthy of valorization and all that. And it's a different thing for kind of everyday research, which we would like to be able to do, but without third-party funding, we can't even begin. So that's why I thought it was useful to kind of set those separate.
I think that's an enormously important point, because if I look at how other countries and other systems would deal with one malpractice, one person who's broken rules, not everybody would be punished because other people would still be regarded as trustworthy. And perhaps that's because they have more opportunities to demonstrate that they are trustworthy without needing to come through the grant system. I'm aware that we're now down to sort of the last couple of minutes. I'm going to summarise, if I can, in a minute. But before I do that, anybody else on the panel who wants to make a final point? Lawrence? Yes, please.
I have two final points, I think. One is one of my favorites. When do you get rid of the habilitation? Because this is a landmark hindrance for younger people to get fast into power. And the other one is, I think that I haven't seen enough real collaboration between Norwegian, the Norwegian innovation landscape and the Polish. There's some, now I'm very unpolite, has some window dressing, but no, there's almost a complete lack of real integration. I don't see the reason why, because both countries are very attractive. And if you join forces, you are 3 times as attractive.
Any final comments from the audience before I sum up on that one? No? Okay. Then I think my main takeaways from this is that clearly you can always improve the legislative slide. Perhaps there are a million things to do. Perhaps actually nothing really stands out very strongly. But in the end, probably more important than changing legislation is going to be building trust, which can happen in a number of different ways, although I think one of the ways that's been highlighted to us is if people are in a position where they can demonstrate that they are trustful, you're more likely to trust them with money that comes from funding agencies. But within the grants themselves, that it would help if there was more flexibility for outcomes, if there was a more rapid response from people, which would also, again, make the grants a stronger stepping stone towards Horizon Europe, where we do already see those things being built in. And I think sort of the final point which is going through my mind on the basis of what was actually said towards the end is that at the moment when I work on projects to do with valorization and in particular impact, the most impact that I'm seeing is coming from the arts, humanities and social sciences, where for the STEM sciences we say, well, the impact here is money and jobs, tick, tick. But so many humanities and social scientists are able to demonstrate through their projects that they have an impact on society. It's just much harder because we're trying to find sustainable business models to do this. So we need really to think much more broadly about science if we really want to make sure that we can achieve impact from valorization. Those would be my takeaway points. I know we're now out of time, so I'm going to thank everybody on the panel for your interventions and ideas, and perhaps we move to the next panel and we'll come back to some questions later. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. And exactly, we are now moving smoothly to the third panel on technology transfer, TT support, TTO, and again, skills. I think that all our panels about skills and competences. So please let me invite the last group of panelists, Professor Neficha, Dr. Andy Tax, Professor Bożena Tyliszczak from the Krakow University of Technology, and unfortunately, the fourth panelist is ill, so she couldn't make it, and it's very pity because it's exactly the project on smart cities and in social sciences. So it would be a nice bridge of what Lisa just said, but unfortunately, it's what happened to all of us sometimes.
Thank you. What I'm going to ask here is that perhaps again you start just by briefly introducing yourself, and you have about 3 minutes when nobody will interrupt you to say exactly what you feel on this topic. Then I have a list of difficult questions to fire at some of you, and we take questions from the panel again. So can I turn to you and ask you if you would start? It's probably already on if you tap the top.
I'm Bożena Tyliszczak from Krakow University of Technology. It's okay?
Try.
It's my voice. It's not problem with it's my voice. I'm Bożena Tyliszczak from Krakow University of Technology, and I think first problem is what the scientists have, what they do, and what they can sell. When we know what we have, what we do, and this is the most important part. That we can sell all technology or only part of this technology. It's not all technology industry need. Maybe only one step, one part of our research. And it's very important. We, in university, we want to sell everything what we have, what we do for every year, and it's too much for industry. They don't need everything. They need only one part or one step, and it's important. And another thing, who tell what the price for the technology? If grant is for 5 million euro, and the technology is the same, no, it's not the same price for technology. And who decide what's the price for technology? Industry or university? Because not researcher. And it's very important in university. University must know what industry need, what market need. Not only industry, what market need, what they can sell, and what is benefit from this technology.
Thank you. You raise a number of important points there. What I'm going to come back to you is sort of briefly on the final one, where you say, I mean, that the researchers need to know not only what is the value, but what industry needs. At the moment, does anybody feel responsible for answering those questions? Is it the researcher? Is it the university? Is it the Centre for Technology Transfer? Who feels they should be answering those questions?
Maybe it's not so easy because in university, about everything, the state dean, rector. But the transfer technology, the Center of Transfer Technology should know what's the price for technology and what we can sell and what we can do. And it's the biggest problem because in Center of Transfer Technology, working people who don't work in industry, they work all life in universities. Many people work all time in universities and they don't know what market need, what industry need. It's different world in universities and in market.
Important points. Okay, let's come back to that in terms of the role of a tech broker later in that case. Runa, from what you've done over the last few months and your background, what are the points that you think we should be talking about?
Yeah, so a number of things, but I think let's focus on the ecosystem here.
Yeah. I'll do swap.
Zalno? Yeah, right. Okay, so yeah, a number of things, but I think we'll focus on the ecosystem mainly, and especially as kind of a topic of collaboration between industry and business. So I mean, I've worked quite a bit on this from the Norwegian side on how researchers collaborate with industry, and what struck me here is, and of course this varies depending on the discipline, on which sector you're in, but quite a number of the researchers we talked to said, first of all, simply there's not industry here that we can work with. So there seems to be a poor alignment between the types of technologies or sectors that researchers are focusing on and the local industry structure, which goes kind of back to the point that was made in the previous panel that, maybe we shouldn't only focus on high tech. Maybe we should examine what are the industries or the areas where there is a possibility to build a competitive advantage here and try to build something around that. And then the other point, which quite a number of people made was, well, we're having difficulties reaching the level that is required by multinationals. So, if there is not a local industry, could you try to go on to the industry outside of Poland? And most of the researchers seem to say no. Actually, they wouldn't be interested in talking to us, which in some way is a bit of a pessimistic point, I guess. And maybe they're being a bit too timid. So maybe there would be an interest, but at least that was a relatively widespread mindset I found. Even European multinationals, but also to an increasing extent Chinese ones, were seen as being at a different level, so we can't really compete with those. And I think there, what can you do then as a research system if you're faced with that situation? Well, one is try to connect with the international network, which is exactly what the EEA Norway grants is for. So, I mean, this is where it would be very useful for Polish researchers to hook onto companies' industry in Norway and use that as a bridge into reaching this level. But we didn't really see much of that, I think, happening. So there wasn't that kind of meaningful interaction between researchers in Poland and Norwegian industry. There was more with researchers in Norway, and then it was kind of with the industry on each side, which makes sense to me. I mean, that's the way I've seen this work for a number of contexts, right? Is that companies, they have their international networks, but they tend to actually collaborate with researchers locally unless they're really, really highly developed companies. And researchers also tend to actually work with local industry, whereas they have their international academic network. So you have, in a way, maybe to go through that as a bridge, but the grant scheme should maybe try to sort that and do it differently. And then the third point on this kind of international connections, we found, I think, a lot of very internationally connected researchers. So a lot had experience from abroad, had either done their PhDs abroad or even worked abroad after that, and then returned to Poland and used that as a basis for setting up research groups, which is a very strong starting point, I think, for building this kind of internationally connected group. But then still, they found it very hard to recruit international scholars at the next level. So there wasn't really a possibility of attracting internationals to do PhDs or postdocs here, which, coming from a system where all of the applicants for our PhD programs are international. I mean, we don't get hardly any Norwegian applicants ever for PhD positions in our system. It's a bit surprising that, with researchers that are that connected themselves to the international research community, still it's not attractive. So there is something there on how do you make the system also attractive for young international scholars.
Several points, and particularly that last one, I'm hoping we come back and discuss a bit more with the audience. Just if I can briefly to take you back to the second point over the design, because I think this left me a little bit surprised too, that for a grant with Norway, where you often had to have a Norwegian company involved, I would have expected that to have been a beachhead for a research institute over here saying, well, there's clearly an advantage of going into the Norwegian market. We have a Norwegian partner, we can go into the Norwegian market. And we weren't seeing that. Do you have any thoughts on how you can strengthen a grant scheme so that the beachhead becomes a reality rather than a checkbox? I mean, is that something that can be addressed through evaluation criteria, through a stronger plan at the application stage? Is it something that should be developed over the course of the project? How do you leverage on the fact that there's a Norwegian partner out there?
Yeah, I think the latter. I mean, I think this is something that is really kind of a long-term thing to build that kind of relationship. So, I mean, we come back a lot to trust, but to me, it's a bit more multifaceted than that when you have the differences between industry and academia and the way of working. So there are many dimensions in which they differ. I mean, one is the trust dimension, or just that they don't know each other well enough, but it's also that they don't really understand each other, maybe. It's that they have different incentives, different kind of cultures and norms regulating them. So there are all these numbers of barriers to that collaboration, even within the same nation or cultural context. And then if you add an international collaboration on top of that, then it becomes kind of an additional obstacle. So you really need a lot of time, I think, to build this up. And I've worked in a few European projects where, I mean, this is typically the setup. You have an academic network of people who know each other from the same field, and then each of them have their own national non-academic partners. And you don't really get meaningful interaction between the universities and a non-academic partner in another country, right? Because that is kind of one step too far. And I think the same applies in this program, is that, academics can associate with academics because they are kind of the same and they can understand the local non-academic sector. But understanding how industry works in another country might be a big challenge, and certainly one that really requires you to spend a lot of time there and working with them directly in order for it to work.
Or might be a role for the technology transfer officers. Randy, can I come to you? Because I know over the course of the project, you've looked very hard at what is or is not happening to support technology transfer, and you have thoughts and ideas and questions on this one.
Yes, thank you. I must first of all say I'm a biologist and have a doctoral degree in innovation sciences, which is social sciences. So I'm combining the two. And I've been working both at university and as a tech transfer for many, many years. And I've been working mainly with projects. And I must say, in contrast to many of my expert colleagues, I'm not an expert on Poland. But I must say I have met so many very impressive research projects in this exercise. So please do not be humble about your activity. However, there is some important takings, and that is that many reported the lack of support from their TTO. That was a finding, one of our key findings. And I want to emphasize the importance of having a critical mass, competence and skills in the TTO. And that is not only for Poland, it's for everywhere. But if you don't prioritize the TTO and the expertise there, that will feed back on the valorization and commercialization activities. And the TTO, or CTT, as you call it here in Poland, is usually the first, and we have heard it, many have today also said it, usually the first place a researcher come with their idea. That can be a vaguely idea, or it can actually be a prototype. So it can be anything, but the TTO is usually the first place they come. And if the TTO is not able to advise or help the researchers further on the path, it either be a pure commercialization, which is a license, a spin out, or perhaps a collaboration with industry, or even a process of improvement of something in the society, a valorization path. That is very bad for both the university, the society, and not at least for the TTO and the researcher themselves. That is why it's very important to have competence and critical mass in TTO. However, the TTOs, where most of the TTOs, as we know them today in the world, were created as economic entities providing money back to the university, making individual researchers rich. Both research and experience has proven that is not the case. It's only a few cases where in very high prestigious universities where TTOs actually have earned money. So I would also say that our suggestion or recommendation that TTO should expand their knowledge, also include valorization, is very important, because this is the first place that the researchers meet this thinking. Perhaps not the first place, we know that, but it's an important place. And if they are not getting the right advice at this place, many opportunities can get lost. But in order to do so, it's very important that the TTOs are not a kind of a dusty IP protection office deep in the research department of a university. It has to be seen by the rectors, the university leader, by the government, and it also has to be seen, be enough funded in order to do their job. So one of our suggestions is also to look into pooling of resources. And there are good examples of how regions, perhaps more distant regions, where university is not able to create the critical mass themselves, can pool resources. Norway is actually also an example, along with France. And there are also papers out there with a lot of examples so you can look into. But please don't think of that as a very bad examples. Big is not always beautiful, Magdalena, I agree with you. But very, very small entities do not have enough competence. And my last comment, please also look internationally. That has been a key word along with all our recommendations in this, not only for TTOs, but TTOs should also look internationally and collaborate, both among themselves here in Poland, but also try to find collaborators outside in EU, in our TTO organization, etc. Well, that was all for now.
No, thank you. That's great. Although I'm going to come if I can, straight back with the question. Because people talk a lot about mobility of researchers and internationalization of researchers. I actually think that it's quite challenging for mobility and internationalization of people in technology transfer offices. They often aren't offered quite the same opportunity to go and spend 3-6 months abroad. Do you have any examples or thoughts? How can you internationalize a technology transfer office?
Perhaps I would start with the tech trans associations. Could be the ASTP or the Autumn. Could be a good place to start. They have had projects where they have try to collaborate. The TTOs are evaluating each other. I guess Carl has evaluated TTO around this Europe. And so these associations are thinking along this line, and also EU has some grants for these high-hanging fruits, very high-hanging fruits, but they have, and it could be working on a European level, try to increase such funds for capability building and collaboration. So there are opportunities, and of course governments and funding agencies could stimulate in order to create this critical mass. And also I think here the transition from being IP guardians and commercialization brokers only towards a more knowledge and valorization brokers, as we have been talking about today.
Right, but because I do see the lack of funding at times as being a problem. It obviously costs if you want to go to an ASTP meeting in Europe, and not all universities can afford to send people. I do know there's an ongoing Horizon Europe pilot where they're trying to find ways of getting people from TTOs to spend time on secondment to other TTOs. But again, it's taken a Horizon Europe project to try and build this and work out whether it can or cannot work. Can I come to our audience at this point then and ask comments and thoughts about how you think that technology transfer support in Poland could be strengthened? Whose responsibility is this? Can it be done through grant schemes, by funding people through grant schemes, as I know is happening under at least one, if not two streams now? Is that something that people think would be positive? Do you need a completely different model? And how do we achieve critical mass without asking that large universities outsource their technology transfer to other large universities? Please, yes.
Basically, the rights problem, which seems to me inherent, that we use public money, and all the companies, there is a very thin borderline. When I start to talk with a company with some my knowledge, do I already pass public money in some sense or not? So I think it is not only the problem in Poland, but this is general problem. How to define when public money was used properly, when can it be a problem? This is important issue concerning cooperation with.
I agree, and I think that's an important point. We should take that one away and think about that a bit more in the report. Any other thoughts? Yes, there.
Follow up to international role. I mean, the involvement of TTO. I think it's quite kind of natural thing. So in our case, for example, there's a lot of meetings for regions outside Poland. For example, in Germany, in Berlin area, we had such meetings, and our TTO was just traveling there, presenting our activity and networking with the people. And now it's like every year he's going to join this conference. So I think that there are also events that are dedicated for the entrepreneurs, and also TTOs may be attracted by these events and make the proper networking. So it's kind of natural thing.
Somebody to send them and pay to travel.
Yeah, exactly. But this is our organization that is, managing this money. It's natural, also part of the budget.
So is there money in the budget at universities to do something like this? If I've recruited somebody into my CTT, can I say I think it would be really useful if they went to a meeting in America or Europe this year? Where does the money come from to do this?
So that's money from grant. I mean, it's granted from a Foundation for Polish Science. That may be right. Yeah, yes, but this is I understand, but this is the natural consequence, right, of having professional TTO office. So that's.
Yeah, but at least there are these things that, for example, when we planted grants, we also talked to our foreign partners. There's
about the opportunities if we can send the person for, let's say, 2 months for learning. Yeah, but this is again, it goes from down, not from the up. And I don't know it's the right direction, but at least it is like, something, but not enough.
Right. Understood. Okay. Can I come back then to the issue of ecosystems? Because obviously you can formally send somebody from A to B in order to make sure they build connections. But once you start to build an ecosystem, you would hope that more people just had more contacts. Any comment on how we take the ecosystem more international then? I mean, obviously to build it regionally through hubs, but what about regional expansion, international expansion? How does that work?
Yes, I mean, I think usually connections go through other connections, right? So you might start with a pair of researchers working together or two companies working together, and then they bring in their networks into a broader project. So I think it is a gradual thing where you kind of feed off the connections you have and build a multilateral system in some way. I mean, there are obviously a lot of these more structured top-down collaborations, either between regions or between universities, but often they become more maybe superficial collaborations than meaningful ones. So it has to be followed up, I think, at least with hands-on projects that involve the people on the ground, and that those have to go over time, I think. But I think it is a useful structure if you can bring in both sides essentially from different ecosystems or from different regions into the same project over time. Then gradually they will also learn to interact across those boundaries.
Randy, do you have any comment on that one either too, about how we build ecosystems and internationalize? Sorry, I'm asking, these aren't even questions I told them I might ask either, so I'm throwing things at them.
I should have. What we know with ecosystem is that they don't necessarily evolve from locally to globally by themselves. It has to be, as Rune is saying, connections. And so doing collaboration is across borders, in my opinion. The only way is not to just go to meetings. It is to have common projects. And as such, the Norwegian grant is an example of that. But I agree with my fellow that it has not succeeded in building strong connections between the researchers from the two countries. So I also agree with the suggestions that building into if you are using grant scheme and want to build collaboration, there should be some more than just ticking off. You have a company in the grant scheme and as such. So real collaboration in projects could create more international ecosystem, but it doesn't happen by itself, and it needs more than one project.
Right.
Yes.
In Poland, we have a cooperation pact. It's cooperation between TTO, and they cooperate.
Pact. Yeah, I've been very impressed by pact.
But
yes.
They cooperate, but between TTO, not between TTO and industry, and that's the problem in Poland. They have a conference. They have meeting, but not with industry.
So they've built their own network, but that network doesn't actually then join to other industrial networks. Interesting point. And how do you think that the TTOs and PACT ought to address in making those linkages to the wider system?
I think we need meeting with universities, TTO, and industry, and we cooperate together. Then we can look for these problems and we can solve it. And now we have problem with TTO don't know what we have, like what scientists have in our departments, in our laboratory. That's the problem. They going to a meeting and they don't know what we have, what we can sell. What they can sell because they don't know what we do, how we work, how long we work. That's the problem. What's the technology? That's a medical technology. It's chemical technology or other technology. It's not the same time for the technology for medical industry. We need more time and more money. Or maybe industry need only part of our technology, or they don't need our technology. They have all results, and we do something, and we don't know why we do something in our laboratory. It's the problem, because we do something new. Why you think it's new? It's better. How much better? About 2%, 5% better? For industry, it's
to what extent does your TTO have specialists inside it that understand your subject because they've come from your subject? Do you have specialists inside your university TTO?
Yes, we have, but we have 2 or 3 people to all university. It's
lacks critical mass.
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
We need more specialists, more people who understand our research. The people who work and with us or look what we do. They can explain someone from industry what we do.
I know that Rune had. Can I just come to my colleague here and then I come to you?
Yeah, I just want to kind of follow up on that point because on the link between TTOs and industry, because we've discussed now a bit kind of how do you achieve critical mass in TTOs, and one option obviously being merging across universities, but then the other one, which I mean both Randi's company and the company where I'm board chair, which is Valide in Stavanger, is they are integrated innovation companies, which basically, I mean, one of the things that surprised me in the Polish system is that you have the CTTs and the SPVs separate, doing different things, and each with very restricted mandates. In our system, we had those in one organization, right? And then that organization also merged with a private incubator, so that we now have an innovation company that has a TTO function, it has an incubator, it has an accelerator, it has cluster managers, and it has seed funding. So basically it runs its own fund that can invest in its own companies, which creates a stream essentially where if you find an academic at the university that has a good idea, you can help them protect their IP, set up their company, get funding in and invest in that company, and then run them through an accelerator program to basically teach them to be entrepreneurs. And this is all within one company, which is not massively large. It has like 14 employees, right? So it's still at a relatively small scale, but you integrate functions that essentially have the effect of bringing them closer to industry, because I mean they need to bring in industry funding for their seed funding program. They need to bring in industry mentors for their accelerator, and they need to actually understand the market for the incubator to work. So I think integrating in that way across the kind of value chain of the TTO's work is also a very useful way to go.
Fine, thank you.
I just wanted to comment on what you have previously said. It is true that TTO don't know what we are doing, but it also depends on us somehow. I know it would be optimal to have like a constant platform when we meet and we discuss and we show to TTO what we have and they give us a feedback. But if there's nothing like that, we can just always make a call and go there. Of course, they are not the best, but they also have some knowledge. And if they don't have full knowledge, they know who we can ask. And I think that we should try also to understand each other. And of course, it's easy to judge the other part, but if we just try to, make the first step, maybe it will be good.
To step across the gap.
Yeah.
Understood, yeah.
I would like to raise another point of view of cooperation with the industry. We are cooperating our university for many, many years with the industry, let's say big industry worldwide, not in Poland, but worldwide, not only in Poland, let's say. And there's one point that we are doing a lot of researches for the industry, but we've got many times no response from this. Okay, they are very satisfied, they are paying for this, but we have no feedback. Of course, we've got another requirements, what we should do and ideas. So, but this is not the point because, of course, I understand this is the know-how of the industry and this is classified, let's say, and not available to another institutions and another people. But this is also the very important issue that should be taken in account when we are talking about the cooperation and the commercialization of our results.
Gentleman down there at the end. Down the far end here.
Worst. Take a suggestion.
Yes, please, go for it. I understood you were first, so go on. Okay. Because I think this meeting is a bit of brainstorming also for the next potential horizon of E. So how about we just flip everything upside down and start thinking outside the box? What if, propelled by Research Council Norway, Norwegian companies were able to adopt Polish research institutions that are partnered with Norwegian research institutions for a small project? Just make it a science fair where Norwegian businesses can directly contact Polish researchers who already partner and just come and think. Then we prepare something for them, like, I don't know if it get funded, but you see what I'm saying. Polish academic institution prepares what we can do, and then some Norwegian company likes it best. If they don't like it, that was a wrong idea, we need to prepare something else. But if the idea is to try to have something international, maybe at this stage, thinking about global solutions is a bit too ambitious. Let's try to think bilaterally. This funding is bilateral. And let's try to see if Norwegian business is interested in what Polish research is doing. And if that works out, then there's just something to build on. Because I understand a lot of people are complaining about TTOs. I can do all kinds of complaining about Polish business not being mature enough to get our crazy best ideas. Great. We can do all this complaining, but let's try to find, it's not that costly to do this experiment and see maybe that works. Maybe we need to complement TTOs with alternative solutions. I'm sorry for stepping in, but just listening to you as an outsider. It's a very, well, I would say, you're not an outsider, you're part of the stakeholder group, but it's a very concrete suggestion, and I want to come back to it because it probably chimes with something else I wanted to ask people about. Let's just come to our gentleman at the end then.
Yes, my name is Tomek and I work at TTO, at Wrocław University of Science and Technology. And I just have one little comment. First, PACT was created by my university also and few more to exchange the knowledge about the technology transfer, to training the technology broker, not to offer the technology from university to industry. This is the second part of PACT working. But from my point of view, as a technology broker, I work in our TTO at Wrocław University of Science Technology. We do valuation technology. We do we create the technology model. We make few licensing agreement every year. And maybe we should see, not also my university. I know a few universities in Poland what do the same or better. Maybe we should see the positive part of work of our university and ask or see what they are working in this system, which is not perfect. And maybe we should think why they are working and duplicate these cases. Thank you.
Again, it's a very solid suggestion, which I think is really useful. Because we have the Norway grants in the room at the moment, I want to come back to the issue of what might be done differently in the future. And I think it's very positive that you have to have a Norwegian partner, And as I said, that ought to create a beachhead, it ought to create an international linkage. What should be the balance between the Norway grant schemes saying, we trust you to find the right partner, do the right thing, get the right results, but also perhaps the Norwegian partners saying, we are there to help you find the right partner, to put you in touch, to help you manage the relationship over the course, so in the end the outcomes are strengthened. Do you see a stronger role for the Norwegian grant side themselves to leverage on what seems to be an opportunity that we're not seeing fully realised at the moment? I'm gonna put you a bit on the spot. Let's give you a microphone. Can we do this? Thank you.
Well, you're challenging me, and luckily I'm not the boss, so I. But I think it's about flexibility, and the reason for us having this event is because we want to see what are the possibilities, what should be explored, what should be investigated to see if it's possible from the Norwegian side, from the Polish side, and to get the good ideas and what could be done. Because there are obviously limitations on both sides and from the hierarchy and the objectives of the EA Norway grants as such. But it's all about getting good ideas and having sufficient flexibility to have the individual calls, I think, so that they focus on what should be really addressed in order to solve these challenges we have. But being concrete, I think it's very difficult. I don't know if Alexandra would like to comment on some of that.
I can try to be a bit more concrete, and then kind of you can give me some feedback if that sounds interesting. So what I'm hearing from Rune, kind of what I think we're doing well in Norway currently is this building up an ecosystem around the TTO, so that the TTO is not just an office with this particular kind of narrow function, but that I think many of the big universities in Norway are now kind of have established an ecosystem with venture capital, seed funds, kind of so build, and that's not. So we were talking earlier about critical mass. Critical mass doesn't need to be huge, but you need the right components. So, kind of responding to your idea, Lisa, I think we can say that it's already been an opportunity both in the EA Norway grants research programs and also in the kind of sister program which has been focusing on business development for Norwegian companies and Polish companies, Norwegian companies and Polish academic institutions to connect. So that's kind of that's been already kind of tested a bit. Doesn't mean that it shouldn't continue and can't be improved. But what hasn't been tried is trying to take this kind of experience of clusters, centers for innovation, research-based innovations, which is also a scheme we have in Norway, and the ecosystems around the TTOs, and try to maybe build something based on that. So I don't really I don't have super high hopes and ambitions for these kind of single connections between one small companies, and most companies in Norway are small and medium-sized companies, and an institution in Poland. Kind of that, I don't think that will be just create this huge life-changing, But maybe building some sort of mechanism which could transfer some of the good practices in Norway, and also build a relationship between maybe like the TTO in Wrocław and Stavanger, and kind of building on that.
Yep. Thank you. Rune, did you want to come back on that?
Yeah. Also, I mean, I think, and I agree with the last point, right? That it's not about mixing an individual SMB with a research group in Poland. That probably wouldn't work. But another aspect of the Norwegian Research Council framework, which is very well developed is the role of intermediaries, and which doesn't maybe seem to have been so applied in this program, right? So we have in other programs which are aimed at capacity building, this role of competence brokers or other types of intermediaries. Essentially, if you are a company, they will help you find the right research partner and the right grant for your need, right? And you could apply something like that in this program to essentially not leave it completely bottom up, but trying to find, okay, what would be a good constellation of a research group and a firm or a cluster of firms in Norway with a research group and a cluster of firms in Poland, and how might that work? So I think taking that infrastructure that's already in place in the Norwegian Research Council and applying it also in this case might be somewhere to start.
I'm also. Can I ask a question? Then I come to you, Loritz. Okay. I'm going to ask a sort of a very naive question, although I know I think the colleague from the Icelandic has gone. Right. But because we're here very much talking about the experience of Norway grants, but we also have EEA grants. To what extent do the different partners within the EEA also work together as a network between their different grant schemes to try and build an EEA network and, I mean, again, create critical mass and strengthen? Is that evident and visible? Is there room for more work between the different partners? Alexander?
I think I'm going to be the only one for this one. So the mix of EEA and Norway, kind of the EEA and Norway grants has been a bit different in different countries. So in Poland, the research programs only had 10% of the 10% of the funding was through EEA grants, and the 90% was Norwegian. So that kind of pushed the Icelandic part a little bit to the side. But in other countries, I'm looking at my colleague over there from Thatcher in Czech Republic. The program in EEA and Norway grants there was split 50-50. So there we actually have Icelandic partners involved in some projects. So there were kind of study trips going over. So we're aware, and we try to connect and make sure kind of the Icelandic cooperation is also, and yeah.
Okay, good.
Our Icelandic colleague isn't here today, but we do talk to him.
I know one of the colleagues was here this morning, but she may have had to go. So I just wondered to what extent there was coordination between the different schemes too. But clearly there is. You certainly know each other, and there's a degree of coordination. Right. Loritz, you wanted to?
Yes, because I don't know, my critical ears hear some interest in kind of blueprints. And there does not exist an efficient blueprint that you can transfer from one place to another place. I would argue for processes and collaborative processes rather than blueprints, and to facilitate through the grant system that this happens, funding the real collaboration also between kind of intermediary stakeholders such as TTOs and whatever it's called. Learning by doing things together is probably much better than saying we did this and this is fantastic for us, so it will also be fantastic for you. So I'm sorry if I'm too critical, but I mean, I have a lot of good examples from many countries I have worked in, but I always hesitate to say this is fantastic, this is what we did. So I don't know.
No, I agree, because I think this was fantastic for us for the following reasons. Because it worked here, this is why it worked here. These were our problems. These were our framework conditions. I think if you don't do that, then good practice is just another story.
Collaboration, and not window dressing. This is for Paris.
Brandy.
I want just to emphasize also the need for bridging the gap, which Dorota started, because there are big gaps in the funding schemes, both in all countries, I would say. We have seen many of them here in Poland. There is a lot, it's a huge gap where you have used up all your alternatives to develop your ideas further. heard that, then you are lost totally. And this gap exists, and it exists everywhere. So don't forget the gap, the funding gaps that are there. And also, since so many programs want to make valorization and innovation happen, but there are no tasks or no funding available for actually doing it. It's just in words in the program. The actually projects are set up as ordinary research projects. So when it comes to valorization and innovation and commercialization activities, there is no funding there. So don't forget the gaps that Dorota and
I think that's an important point. I do know, again, from discussions yesterday evening, that the Foundation does now have a grant scheme which is or is going to be funding a lot more in terms of activities and support. Is that a point where you want to speak briefly about that, Mikael, maybe?
There's a couple of initiatives. Obviously, we learn from this panel, from the previous experience, and we want to address the gaps, actually, in our new funding schemes. Namely, TeamNet actually is a new scheme where we address this cooperation issue, this IPR issue, and the management issue of especially market needs and the linkage with the market. So this is one scheme. The another which we are developing and now starting next month will be the PRIME program, which will be addressing the skills and the team building and product development and business model. So this is what we can actually present next time when we meet.
So we need AI to produce some images that show that gap narrowing and filling. I'm aware that we are basically out of time on this session, but I know that we now... Are we going to take a very short break as we arrange ourselves for the roundtable, or are you afraid everybody will run away? Justina?
No, we are not afraid of everyone running away. So if we need 5 minutes break, we can...
But that makes sense, and then we rearrange that, because then I know people... I can see people's faces. They have other points they would like to make that have come out of today, and perhaps that gives us a chance to revisit all the topics in one final session.
Yeah, definitely.
Great. Thank you very much. We'll come back shortly.
Thanks, Black.
I can start with my colleagues from the foundation. Michał, I can see you.
No, that's fine. That's
Right, okay, then we start our last session, and if people are still eating and drinking through the last session, then that's good. I may even join you. I thought what I was going to ask the panel and the room to do in this last session is just to reflect a bit on what we have heard today, because we've come quite a long way since the first session on third stream mission and grant scheme design. We've looked at the legal issues, we've looked a little bit at ecosystem building, perhaps not as much as we could have. We've looked a bit at developing skills. We've talked a bit about technology transfer organisations. But what I would be interested in, based on what you've heard today, would be perhaps if you could make what you think is the biggest takeaway at the moment for you from hearing people talk today. And if you had one recommendation, and I think we should offer these either to the Foundation or to the Norway grants representatives, what would be your recommendation for action going forward? And I'm sorry, Hugh, I'll come back to you at your end, but Carl, can I start at your end? What would be your major takeaway and your suggestion for action?
My main takeaway would be latched to what we talked about in training, education, and also back to what I learned today, which was totally sort of new to me, that in Poland, academics are at best viewed as uninteresting. I was at the board of ASTP for a few years back, and the main emphasis that we had at the time was to make technology transfer be recognized as a profession. So to me, that would be a key advice in the environment we're talking about. Because if academics are not properly recognized in Polish society, than I would suspect that technology transfer people. I mean, some people will say that technology transfer people are those that couldn't make it as academics, and they weren't employable by industry, so they failed twice and they ended up in tech trans. I'm a registered technology transfer professional, so I beg to differ. But I think that the registered technology transfer professionals is a society that goes, at least in part, towards having that profession be recognized as something of value and something with a competency that people would know pretty much what is. So I think that would be my main takeaway in terms of extending basically what we talked about today.
Thank you, Carl. Randy, can I come on to you then? Because tech transfer is very much your area too. Any particular recommendation for the funding agencies with the grants, or anything that you would say that you really think it would make a difference if they did this in tech transfer?
Yes, since Carl advocated my field so nicely, and we are former colleagues. Yeah. But I think one of my main takeaway from not only from today, but it was strengthening from today, was the one that I started with. I have been working with projects for many, many years in many ways, both as a researcher myself but also as a university administrator doing research administration, as an evaluator, as a tech trans professional. I'm registered too. And one of my main takeaway is that be flexible. And that was also one other person in one of the panels. Be flexible in the grants. Be flexible in your legislations. Try not to focus on the details beforehand. Try to focus on the results that will come out, and not so much about the details beforehand. I think, and be flexible when plans are changing underways, because it's something that is happening is that things in innovation and commercialization and valorization, things are not linear and not predictable at all, perhaps only in drug discovery. And so be flexible for how to use the grant schemes, how to evaluate the grant schemes, but put in resources for doing valorization activities, even though it might be hiring non-academics for doing stuff in projects or other things that might not be very the usual things you do in grant schemes. That is my takeaway from today.
Thank you. Actually, I'm going to come down to Hugh at that point, if I can just come back, because what in effect I think you're partly saying too is show trust. if you're doing that. Hugh, any thoughts from your side then about how trust can be better built, particularly if you're one of the grant funders here?
I think one of the main routes to trust is actually communication. And it's at all levels. And it is so that people understand and know what scientists are doing. They understand what universities are for and what they're doing, what the rectors are actually trying to do to support those universities, what the government policies are for research and valorization. All of that needs to be communicated very clearly, because once people start to understand, oh, that's why they study these things, that's why this is a benefit to society, then you begin to get the trust in what the scientific community is about. You get the trust in the valorization process. And I think one thing I'd also like to add to that is internationalize, internationalize, internationalize. Really look outside. It's not that the way other people do things is any better, but at least look at it and understand what it is and how it works, and how it might be adapted to your requirements. And similarly along those lines, I'd say, and I talk very much in favour of the technology transfer officers. They've come in for a certain amount of criticism. But actually, they should be your links onto networks. And the networks I'm interested in tend to be sector specific. So if it's biotechnology, the network, the core bed of the network is San Francisco, Boston, Cambridge, Heidelberg, Singapore. If it was the automotive sector, it would probably be Detroit, Barcelona, etc., somewhere in Japan. The point about that is what the technology transfer officers need to know about is not to be experts on the materials for tires or the viruses for this or that disease, but they need to be able to connect you into those international networks. So I think that's a critical message.
Okay, so in part communication and transparency. Let's come back to the issue then of the internationalization and mobility, and because this for me would closely come into both the ecosystem but also with skills as well. So I'm looking at our two remaining panelists. Who would like to go first?
Yeah, I can start a little bit. I mean, I'm trying to come back also a little bit to the point that Lauritz made about best practices and to what extent you can apply them, because to some extent I agree and to some extent I really don't. So on the side that I agree, I think, this notion that we've had, which has been endemic in innovation discussions, that you have to build your own Silicon Valley is obviously something that's been very harmful for a lot of regions, I think. What you should not necessarily take from that story is how you build your local ecosystem to be self-sufficient. But what you do need to take is the way in which you connect to the international networks, right? So because you can't replicate the scale that you have there, so that's impossible essentially for all regions to do. But you can try to kind of hook up to the right connections and bring the knowledge in that way. But then where I disagree is I think it is important when you're trying to solve problems in your own system to also take ideas from elsewhere, right? And so to have an openness to impulses, suggestions, and not trying necessarily to reinvent the wheel, I think is also an important approach in this space, right? And I say this kind of, so we've discussed a lot of the problems here, which is kind of the rationale for having a panel, and we go out and we're looking for problems. And that's not to say that there aren't best practices also in the Polish system. I think I've been hugely impressed with the quality of the research that's going on. There are a lot of groups that are very well connected, I think, to the international environment. So there are obviously also best practices here that could be shared with other countries, including with Norway. So, but I think we do kind of as a group, what we've tried to do is go looking for gaps and then getting ideas for how to fill them, and then those ideas, they usually come from somewhere. They're not our own kind of brilliant minds at work. They are things that we've seen elsewhere and that we, in a way, need to apply. And then I think it is then the challenge, how do you adapt that to the context that is in Poland? Some will work, some will just obviously not work at all, right? Because the context isn't suitable for that. But that is an assessment that needs to happen kind of at the next stage.
And that, I think, is an emotion I think that I would feel strongly too. I've always felt the idea of just taking somebody else's good practices deeply boring, but it's not innovative at all. We're trying to encourage innovation, but I do believe very strongly in not recreating the wheel and stealing ideas shamelessly. I think you just need to give the ideas to people who will then improve them for the local environment, but they can be quite inspirational, I think, at that point. Lauritz, do you want to add to that?
I 100% agree, but I also think that one can learn from bad practices. And there's an awful lot of bad practice around in Europe that we can learn from. But before saying what I think I would take home, I think I want to congratulate, because I'm not Norwegian and neither Polish, so I can comment positively on the program you have been running. I think it has been tremendously useful for Poland and probably, hopefully, also for Norway. I do think you can get more out of it in the future in terms of better real collaboration and all the networking activities. I do 100% agree to that. What I take home is that I don't see many people from the demand side here in the room, and I do think that one could do much more on the demand side for innovation, meaning from industry businesses, but also from society at large. Just keep this in mind in the future, how you get the other leg. I think it's Carl who wants to walk on 2 legs only. So please take a look on the demand side, because there's only so much we can think of in terms of how to supply systems and ideas to society, but there needs to be a receptive capacity in the society as well, and we haven't heard much about it here, and maybe it's because it's somebody else's responsibility, but still I feel there is a gap, and I have heard some bad excuses. For example, that Polish industry is not advanced enough to really be able to absorb innovation. I think it's not true. I think that maybe there are corners of the Polish society that is absolutely absorptive and probably absorbs ideas from outside and not from the Polish knowledge system itself. So this is something that is worthwhile to look into, to how to figure out which are really the sectors that can create innovation in Norway. I'm almost 100% sure that all these fantastic ideas from Silicon Valley, forget them. Maybe some of this will take root here, but this is not where you should look. You should probably look some other places. And finally, I also work in Bulgaria and Romania, and I feel pity when countries, because of EU programs, create more elements to their own system, even if the system is not efficient. So there is some push for creating more programs, more units, more structure, incoherent structure. And it's coming from the EU, but probably also from other funders. It could be national or international. Be careful. And sometimes want to say, no, we can do this without a new structure. Even if it's something that is in the bylaws of Horizon, whatever number it is, then you have people also discussing with our colleagues in the EC. And these are all reasonable people, so it's not always, they will insist that you need a new program or new terminology, a new acronym. In Bulgaria, it's awful because they have everything we have in my country, and everything is underfunded, and everybody is unhappy. Okay. So the final recommendation for universities. At my university, the Director for Innovation and Valorization has same status as the deans. Same, right under the rector. So this is also one way of lifting visibility. Thank you.
Thank you. And you've made a point which actually I think we should go back and reiterate, because I think reassessing grant schemes regularly is important, but it actually takes some courage to do this because everybody comes in and they give them a really good kicking, as we say in England. You know, they push them around and say, well, this doesn't work and this could be better. When we did talk to people who'd come through the funding schemes, they were universally positive. And in fact, in the first version of the report, there were quite a lot of quotations, which I'm sorry don't appear in the second version because it had to be shorter. So they've all had to be removed. But people did say how much they valued them, how useful they were, how they allowed people to be creative without necessarily driving them into, as they called it, commercialization. So clearly the creativity was appreciated and wanted very much. And I think that's a message that ought to be taken home today, that they are wanted and appreciated. Before we close today, what I was going to ask was if anybody else in the audience would like, yes, to raise a point, particularly if it's a positive one about the grants, or a suggestion for how they could be further improved.
I'm sorry for taking my voice so many times, but I think that we'll have to look on this edition of the Norway grant a little bit on from the top, because for the majority of researchers, this program, this grant program, is one of any others programs. And the research they are performing are not concentrated only on this program. So I'm very thankful to you that you have set the flexibility, that you don't require the final result of the program, because many times this is a small brick in the wall, another brick and another brick, because we are building this wall together with our colleagues, not only with the Norwegian colleagues, but other international colleagues in other projects in our consortiums. And final output, the final effect is coming after, let's say, 15 years of research. And this is the final project of the, not only this grant, but many other grants as well. And not only my work or my team work, but also the work of other teams, because we're building this together. As you said, the internationalization of the project, the connection, the networking, and so everything this is important. So let's look on this from the top, because I hope the next edition of Norway Grants is coming, and we'll have another possibility maybe to find new projects, to continue our work, because we're specialized in some discipline and would like to continue our work. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that point. It's important. Anybody else who wants to make... Of course I'm looking at it.
Thank you. I think I only have two short things to say. One is, please don't get me the wrong way. It's not. But being a scientist in Poland is super hard. I think this is something that Ms. Witkowska tried to explain. We have much higher teaching load than anywhere else in Western Europe. We are paid much less than anybody else in Western Europe. And we have much more limited access to basic resources than anybody else in Western Europe. So for us, funding such as Norwegian funds and EEA funds, this is a life-changing thing, because it makes normal things possible, right? We can finally work in a standard environment. And if you ask me what's my best experience with Norwegian grants, I mean, it's great to have a Norwegian partner, and it's great to have that collaboration. And I mean, all of this is fantastic. But the fact that I can finally create conditions for a stable team to grow for at least a couple of years, do one particular research agenda and just grow with that, and give young people ability to develop to higher levels of career, this is, this cannot be, the value of it cannot be understated. So even if you only continue with this is already huge, huge thing. So that's my thinking. And I really mean what I'm saying. But having said that, it's like, you got to decide yourself, I think, what you're expecting of us as scientists in a country such as Poland, Poland, Bulgaria, or Romania, when you decide to allocate funding to research. Because when we're in the part of European network with the Horizon and all this stuff, this is just saying, okay, I forget you come from behind the wall. I forget you come from the forbidden part of the European Union. we're just treating you at level, at par, and you gotta stand up to the standards for Western Europe. If you can do it, fantastic. If you cannot do it, just get out. Now, the attitude of the of the Norwegian and EEA funds is different. This is special dedicated funding that only goes to our countries. And I understand you've got some objectives that you want to reach. And I mean, we can fit into those objectives or not, but you guys have to decide what are those objectives, because the only thing we can do is be as best researchers as we can. But whether we achieve your objectives or not depends on how you formulate them. And in a sense, it's good that you do this evaluation after the first round because you can know better for the second round. But you also have to go on and say this publicly ex ante, what you're expecting of us. If this is related to valorization, good, then just make sure valorization is on the agenda and it's funded. The money is available, resources available, all this stuff. If it's something else, just say what it is. If you just want to help us do research as ordinary people in Western Europe do, more than welcome, right? But it's like, without you formulating what you expect of us, it is impossible for us to deliver on that, right? Because we have, as all scientists in the world, we have our own objectives. We know what we want to achieve in the end. And we need to find a common ground for the projects to happen. So I'm not sure if it's very constructive, my comment, but...
No, it is. It is. And I would take away 2 points from this. Your first comment about how important it is echoes what I heard from somebody else in a country where they've just set up a science fund. They haven't had one before. And the researcher said this has been transformational. Now we can build teams. Now we have some longevity about it. So clearly it's critically important. And the other thing I think too is how important the bilateral funding is. Because I know we all want grants to be a stepping stone to Horizon Europe, but we also know how competitive Horizon Europe is and what the failure rate is inside Horizon Europe. And therefore, where you can set up bilateral funding, it can be immensely powerful for me to go beyond a national level and to take it to an alternative level to say, try Horizon Europe. So there is this huge potential that can come from bringing this money across borders for me too. So I think that's also come out of that. Thank you. Loritz, yes.
This panel is not here to kind of figure out how to solve the balance in the EU as such. But I do have some opinions about it, because we also need to see Europe as a continent vis-a-vis other continents. And we want the collective activities in Europe to be compatible with the similar activities in North America, for example, or in China. This means that, for example, the European Research Council, there's no way around going for the best wherever it comes from, because otherwise we have chosen a road that is not leading to even competitiveness with the other continents. On the other hand, we also think that Europe should develop in a fair way. This is why there are regional development programs that are also being implemented alongside with the European Research Council programs as they are. And of course, everything can be improved, but I do think we should recognize that there's an external side to how Europe tries to function. And I have an example from Poland on a European grant that has not led to anything of great importance, even though it was large. And it was a piece of equipment to an important laboratory. And in front of this piece of equipment, somebody has put what I would call a sphinx that guards the equipment almost from being used. Because the worst possible thing I thought would be that if somebody from a competing university in the same city would use this equipment. So when I, in my first intervention, said that there's a lot to be done in terms of bringing the capacities in Poland together. The compartmentalizing that is very bad can be solved if you and want it. It's possible to merge institutions in the same city. It's possible to share equipment. It's possible to probably even share some of the human capital between institutions. And what we have seen is sometimes not that this happens. For example, an example here from Warsaw is that the Warsaw University has created its own faculty of medicine. And you already have a University of Medicine. You already have academy institutes and so forth. So seen from outside, one would ask, why is this? Is this the best way of moving? So I hope I have not alienated anybody, but I try to answer your question because, of course, funding is necessary. Of course, one should recognize that you are underfunded compared to scientists in my country, for example. But EU can only do so much to it, and we cannot, I don't think we can give in on having some resources reserved for the best Europeans to compete for, wherever they come from. Unfortunately, our British friends, they have joined the program again.
Sorry, but
Thank you. And I'm going to in a moment invite any final comments from the floor. I think just one thing that occurs to me over the critical mass issue, I mean, you can try and force critical mass on people. You can say you will merge, you will work together, we will have few of you. This is why I do tend to come back again and again to PACT, to the Technology Transfer Association, because this was created by the technology transfer officers in Poland as their own initiative in an effort to try and create critical mass and address this issue that they had different knowledge spread across different universities, and they were saying if we get together and we share, this will help. So I have always felt very positive about that as not something that was imposed from above, you will do this, but something where several universities said, maybe we can just get together and start trying to address this at a CTT level.
That's something. He started to talk to me. He whispered, now we can only get out of this fund what we put into it. And this should leave some money for our Polish friends, because the Brits used to get about 20% out. They put 12% in. Now they only get 12% out. So the floor is open.
We're not allowed to take any more out, which is, I think, a good thing. Rune, are you holding your microphone up because you want to make a point, or are you just being...
No, I'm just being ready in case I'm asked to. But if I can, then once I have the floor, and I think there were many excellent points being made by our colleague over there. So I mean, and I think one of the ones that struck me when we came in was the slogan on the board here, supporting the best so that they can become better. And I think, yes, the ERC are fine, and that's a useful slogan for a research council. It could never fly in Norway, but it's probably an approach, right? But you can't only do that, right? So because if you only support the best, then the best will remain the best, and everybody else will have no opportunity to become better. So, and this program, I agree wholeheartedly. It's really about capacity building, right? And we need to then put them in a position to become the best in the future. So that's the one point. And then the other, I mean, if we are seeing or coming across as seeing Polish researchers as being the same as everywhere else, that's probably because that's the impression we had actually after going to the interview. So that's probably a good reflection on the quality of the research groups that we met, because definitely colleagues ask me, what's your impression? And I say, well, they're the same as everywhere else. So I think that is probably a good indictment of the Polish system in some way.
Feels back.
Yes. Yeah.
Again, it's nice dialogue, because it's right that the Polish scientists are at par with anybody else, but the visibility of Polish science is not at par with everybody else. So there's still work to do in terms of getting the results out into the global world, and it is not only to do with the language, because of course we appreciate that a lot of what is being published has to be published in Polish, but there is a visibility issue in terms of, and this has a bearing on whom would be interested in collaborating. I don't want to cite H indexes, but it's not, your average national H index is not comparable to Norway's, I can tell you.
We are almost at, well, we are out of time. Randy, can I give you a final comment? Yeah?
Very quick one. I will just say that it's been a privilege to meet with all these research groups and researchers and also working with the project. And I also agree with Rune that there are some recommendations and some takeaways that are global and not only accounts for Poland. So I really hope that what we are doing, and my hope is that it can also be disseminated outside Poland and be helpful for others. Because I think many of the problems are general and not only specialized towards Poland. So thank you. Thank you.
It's been very enjoyable. It's been good. I hand you back over to Justyna.
Thank you very much. Thank you for all the important thoughts that we hear today. Now we need some time to digest them, but I'm sure that they make a great input to our report, and the final version of the report and of the recommendations shall be publicly available in the next few weeks, and of course we will keep you informed. And this was the last point of our agenda today. It's also the end of the online streaming. Thank you very much, and goodbye to all who joined us online.